إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد بعدد كل داء ودواء وبارك وسلم عليه وعليهم كثيرا اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد.
So let's start. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillahi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Bismillah, alhamdulillah. All praise is due to Allah who's given us the ability to study the Seerah, because it's a labor of love, and all labors of love have their fruits, and the fruit of this labor of love is closest to Rasulullah in this world and in the hereafter. And whatever you do has its counterpart, its reflection in the hereafter. So this closeness would be felt in a more acute and in a more extreme way in the hereafter. May Allah give us the ability. A journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step, and it all starts here. So inshallah, may Allah accept from us. I always ask everybody to read Surah Al-Fatiha before we start. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. I'm going to bring up my slide. I'm guessing everybody can see my slide. Yep, somebody confirm they can see it.
Yes.
Right, okay, cool. So today we're talking about source materials. When we normally study Seerah, if anybody had watched my presentation that I did on the other channel, the podcast that I did, I mentioned a lot of things that people didn't understand, and they attacked me for them. And the same things that I've been attacked for by default, I do anyway. So I'm going to do, and there's a logic behind it. If people didn't understand it, they could have asked me the questions politely and they would have known. But because they didn't ask, that's where the problem lied. Now, when I turned around and said that people are teaching Seerah in a way where they don't have answers for the Western audience today, the biggest problem, each generation faces a problem regarding attacks on Islam. So in the earlier generations, there was no definite attack in the medieval period. All they would say in the medieval period is that Rasulullah is a false messiah. He's a false prophet, and he's copied stuff from the Bible, and he's heard stories, and he's a false prophet, just like there were other false prophets according to them. We have the Mormon Church. The Mormon Church, he was a false prophet. We have Nation of Islam, a false prophet. The Mormon Church has become quite successful, but it was hated and despised by the Christian community, the Protestants, the Catholics. Everybody hated the Mormons. Why? Because they claimed a new prophet with a new type of revelation. So this was as far as the attack went on the personality of Rasulullah. Nothing went further. But as society got more literate and sophisticated, the attacks increased greatly too. And today we're in an era where, like, we have generational attacks. So the last century we had the Orientalist movement, and there were some famous Orientalists. We can do a lecture on that, inshallah, most probably I will, and some of their source attacks. We need to do that as well. Regarding, can you not see me, by the way?
Yes.
Can we see? Right, okay. Regarding, because I can't see myself, so it seems a bit strange. Unless I do something, but I'm not going to play back with the system now. I need to learn it actually. Right. So like when it came to the last century, they attacked the authenticity of the Quran. They attacked Rasulullah's personal characteristics. Before that had never been done. If we look at today, the largest attack upon Muslims today is theology. So atheism is a very big problem in the world today, and a lot of our ulama in the madrasa systems are still teaching books that were meant for an audience 1,000 years ago. That doesn't mean that those books are irrelevant. It just means that those books have not been updated. 1,000 years ago, when those books were taught, it was a given across the board that everybody believed in a God. Whether it was the Christians, the Hindus, the Jews, the Zoroastrians, whoever it was, they all believed, pagans, they believed in gods, right? So that was a given. So all you have to do is say, well, you believe in this God, we believe in this God, and here is the proof of this God. And they would understand that proof and then become Muslims. Today, we have the argument for atheism. And we don't need to go into any of the Eastern religions and look at their philosophies to derive that. They can just derive it from materialism, from some Greek philosophy, and they can push forward these arguments of atheism, which Muslims have to. So if you pull out a book on creed, first you need to prove to him that there is a God. So we need to change some of our sophisticated arguments. There is the Kalam cosmological argument, which you know that's been used a lot. But our madrasa systems are slowly evolving, but they haven't evolved fast enough. So we also have the attack on the ahruf and the different qira'ahs of the Quran. This is a new attack. It's only the last 10 years that this attack really has hit the market, so to speak. So before, nobody even knew about this. The first we heard about this was from Western sources. How many of you madrasa students were taught much about the different qira'ahs of the Quran? Right? So this is a new phenomenon, and Muslims have to always be at the forefront to defend themselves. So when I said that Muslims don't have answers, I mean that it's all fair and dandy, nice and whatever, teaching the Seerah where everybody's listening, and it's a coffee shop setting where I'm getting dramatic, I'm pulling out my sword, I'm wearing tarabush or a turban, and I'm dressed like somebody from Arabian Nights, and I'm rousing the crowds, and everybody's going home like, yeah, that was a very good entertainment evening. This is how it used to be in the past. You'd have entertainers entertaining people, or a sacred gathering in the mosque where Muslims would sit together and would discuss the Seerah and the fine points, or just general gatherings. No problem. Excellent. Our forefathers, you did an excellent job. But today when we're doing this, all of our material has been translated by non-Muslims, and not always for the best. There are more books written on the market, in the mainstream market, written by non-Muslims on the Seerah today than by Muslim sources. And there are obscure verses and arguments and stories that they've pulled out from Seerah stories, from the whole Seerah corpus, and they're pushing forward, and the Muslims don't have an answer for it because, number one, they've never seen the argument. Number two, even if they've seen the argument, their audience this time are Western atheists or Christian apologetics that have deliberately sifted through the corpus to find this argument, to push it forward upon you, to silence you. So sometimes a Muslim will come away without an answer, and that doesn't look good. That's a psychologically crushing blow for us, and it's a win for them. So it's very important that, especially in a course like this, that we go through Seerah, the source material. Now, regarding the source material, we can take a deep dive. Now, this is somewhat of it's called deeper Seerah. It's somewhat of a deep dive, but it's not an academic deep dive, because sifting through sources will take weeks if you're really going to go pedantic and pull out the Arabic books, pull out which person accepted this and why they didn't accept this, and everything like that. The problem with that is it's nice if you've got the time, but we haven't got the time. So in this lecture, I'm just going to use just to push the source material forward. That's it. People can do their own research. And one of the reasons why I don't want to give the individual quotes of the critics who criticize this source material from the Muslims is that just like a hadith, you have a hadith that one great muhaddith will say is sahih, another one will say, no, it's only hasan. Another one will actually rubbish the hadith and say, no, this is not a hadith in front of me, but whereas somebody else will. And we find stuff like that being used in the seerah, and we find that in the hadith corpus anyway. So because this is a fine art, it's no point really saying, oh, Imam Malik said this about this particular scholar, or this person said this about this scholar. If you want that, you can find stuff online. You can read the classical books. It's all written in there, but I'm not going to quote it because it doesn't serve our narrative here. We're not here to come and find out which story is true or not. We will only highlight certain stories. Let me see if somebody is here who wants to join, because there was somebody waiting to, yeah. So I don't think it's gonna, nobody's gonna, that particular student that wanted to join, I don't think they've ever used Zoom before, so they didn't even have it downloaded. Right. So you'll see why we don't, later on, as we come across the source material, why we're not going to delve into what each individual muhaddith or imam or great person in the past said about those particular people. We're totally not interested in what the Orientalists have to say. We will look at what the Orientalists have to say on certain stories as and when the time comes. So source material, so ultimately it goes back to the companions. Every single source material goes back to the companions, because the companions lived, sat, worked, fought, married into the household of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So obviously everything that we have goes back. So the biggest problem with the Orientalists is that they say that there's a cut-off of 100 years or something before we have our source material, which is actually incorrect, which we're going to show now. But before this, I'm going to ask somebody a question. What is de facto book on Seerah that's famous worldwide, that everybody says, oh, this is the original source of the Seerah that we have today? Can somebody name me the author of the book, please?
Is it Ibn Hishām?
Yep, Ibn Hishām. Ibn Hishām actually copied somebody else's work. Whose work did he copy?
Ibn Isḥāq.
Ibn Hishām. So that's the classic answer you're going to get from everybody. It all goes back to Ibn Isḥāq. But there are other siyar that he took from. Do we know any of the source material? Has anybody heard of any other material?
Musa ibn Uqba.
Say that name again?
Musa ibn Uqba.
You know, I heard that name actually. Maybe you're right. I'm not too sure, but I have heard that name. But it goes back to like Imam Zuhri. You've heard that name, right?
Yeah.
That's a famous name. There's a lot of people and their work doesn't exist anymore. We'll have a look at it, and it's all been incorporated into other works. So the source material, the most logical, now this is actually a slight attack against the Orientalists as well. So the most logical and sensible scenario is that the companions heard many stories from each other that happened either when they were in front of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam or when they weren't there and their backs were turned and their companions told them this is what happened, and it was mass transmitted. Most of those hadith were from the time of Medina. Why? Because in the time of Mecca, it was a game of survival. We don't have much material from Mecca. If the seerah is this big for Mecca, it would be this big for Medina. Why? Because that was the early phase, and it was a phase of survival, and it was a very tough time. Whereas in Medina, they had their own state. The companions could relax. I mean, they couldn't relax then as well, but they were more relaxed than in Mecca. They could do things. They had their own state. So, more things were observed and written down. The companions are the link and the mesh that everything goes back to. So you have Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and then you have like imagine having a mesh. If you know anything about the internet, there's nodes. And each node is connected by another node, right? So you can have many, many transmissions going all the way back to one person, and then they spread out, and then they could come to you by way of 30, 40 people. So you could have one hadith, but have about 50 renditions of that hadith. This is what happens in Bukhari's book. So it's impossible when the Orientalists tell us that, no, it's not possible that you have sound information. Their arguments are, they look nice on the surface, and those arguments have been picked up by some Muslim historians that work in academic institutes. There's a few on the internet that talk like this. I've been accused of this, but no, I don't buy into any of the Orientalist arguments at all. It doesn't matter if I've been educated in a Western university. It doesn't mean that I pick up Orientalist sources. You can see the bias and you can see their weak hypotheses, because in order for a historian or a scientist to postulate something, they have to first have a hypothesis, and then they have to prove it. And because their hypothesis is wrong, the natural conclusion that follows will be wrong as well, because they're not coming from a sound place. The companions personally witnessed and lived those events. The companions would teach these hadith and prophetic stories to anybody that would listen and their children. If you read the biographies of the companions, it was a very exciting time to be alive, where each of the companions would sit in various parts of the world they were, and people would come in amazement and want to shake their hands. Were these the hands that touched the hands of Rasulullah? Yes. This is one famous story of a companion. And then a massive lion appeared, and each of those people waited in turn to shake hands, because these were the hands that touched the blessed hands of Rasulullah. So as time went by, these companions started to die off, and they got more and more valuable. So people made it more of an attempt to sit with these people and learn these stories. Two very famous companions, Abdullah ibn Abbas and Urwa ibn Zubair. Right, he was Urwa ibn Zubair was a nephew of Aisha, grandson of Abu Bakr, son of Asma bint Abi Bakr, the sister of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, Aisha salamu alayha. So he had the great privilege of having open access to the house of Rasulullah. So his reports are very, very valuable. Abdullah ibn Abbas was someone Rasulullah prayed for, was someone that had unrestricted access as well, because they were the first cousins. And these people, like when we talk about the greatest companions of Rasulullah in their respective fields, certainly these two come under the greatest. Abdullah ibn Abbas was a master of the Quran, and Urwa ibn Zubair was a master of observing the household, sitting with Aisha, and hadith. These are two sources of Seerah. As I mentioned, most left Medina. So they, straight after Rasulullah, they couldn't bear, many of them couldn't bear to live in Medina. It was too painful. And some of them were sent by the respective caliphs, go here, and then the army set out. They went with them. So we have the famous story of Sayyidina Bilal, where he left to go to Damascus and had a dream of Rasulullah, came back and he gave the adhan in the mosque, and everybody came out thinking, can it be? This is the adhan of Bilal. If Bilal has returned, has Rasulullah returned? People actually believe this, and there was not a dry eye in Medina, they say, that day when he gave his famous adhan after all those years of being absent from that city. Why? Because his legs he didn't have the strength to stand to give the adhan anymore, because he couldn't. It was so painful for him. And these are people, by the way, that death is like their next meal for them. You know, they're prepared for death, they understand death, and they look death in the face. They see death everywhere, because really death is to be seen everywhere. And yet this is how they reacted when Rasulullah passed away. Some of these companions and their companions, so the tabi'een, would travel from city to city collecting reports. Some would end up with 100,000 plus hadiths. In the early collections, you'll see 100,000 plus. So Hajar al-Asqalani says, he says the actual quotes we have are 50,000, 20,000 Sahih. Others have their own. I think this is a partial. I don't understand this. At that time, or in the early period, he said there were 50,000, 20,000 Sahih, and others have their own ranking. So he's given a figure for something that he had knowledge to. Memorization was a great thing. One of the problems with the Orientalists is that they say that the Muslims had a lack of, nothing was written down. Because nothing was written down and events were mentioned 100 years afterwards. The hadith were canonized sometimes 150 years, 200 years afterwards. So how could the Muslims know these stories to be sound? How can we accept that the Quran is in its pristine form, or the hadith of Rasulullah are in their pristine form? One thing that needs to be remembered, and we do a separate lecture on this, is that the Arabs were great masters of memorization. Other civilizations had access. First of all, most people in the past were expert memorizers, just like most of you lot were, had you been alive about 30 years ago, before WhatsApp and the internet, where you'd have to remember all your friends' telephone numbers, you'd have to remember every single equation by heart, you'd have to remember dates, you'd have to remember all of this because you didn't have a mobile phone, you didn't have the access to the internet. Our brains have now seen the internet as an extension of ourselves, where we can offload information. And why should I take the effort of remembering something when I know I can look it up on the internet? This has caused us to lose our concentration and lose our memories. In our past, 30, 40, 50 years ago, everybody's memory was strong, and in the past it was even more strong, and certainly for the Arabs. The Persians had stuff written down, the Romans had stuff written down, the Arabs had nothing written down. Everything had to be memorized. They were great artisans of poetry, masters of poetry, and memorizers of poetry and genealogy, and this is what they were famed for, because they had nothing else. So we had Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. He memorized 1 million hadith. Now this sounds like a phenomenal astronomical number. It is. People are thinking, how is that possible? Don't forget, a lot of them would have been crossed, the same hadith, but through different chains. Imam Bukhari, he has 7,563 hadith in his book. The actual number is 2,450. It can go up and down depending on whose criterion you're observing it via. The others are just repetitions, right? So this is how it worked in the early time. In the time of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, he commissioned certain of the companions to collect reports, whether they be Maghazi reports or hadith reports. So it wasn't just a private endeavor where we had certain companions doing it. A lot of the companions needed patronage, where they needed a source of income where they could be free of earning, so they could travel the world and collect these kind of hadith. So a lot of them, not all of them, a lot of them had patrons. That patron could be their father. It didn't have to be a head of state or a governor. It could be a rich cousin or somebody saying, look, you go and study. Don't worry about earning. We take care of your travel expenses. So he asked Abu Bakr ibn Hazm, Ubaidullah ibn Shahab al-Zuhri to compile hadith, and the Seerah was within that. Abban ibn Uthman ibn Affan, son of Uthman, Uthman was probably the 5th person to accept Islam. He was another person who would collect from the early days. We have references going back to Wahab ibn Munabbih. A lot of his narrations were Israeliyat, which have their own place as well. And it's glad that we have them, because now we have comparative material. We can say, well, certain verses in the Quran, if we don't understand, we look at what the hadith says. If it's not clear, we look at some of the stories the companions had. If it's not clear, then we look at the Israeliyat, the stories of what the Jews have. We look at their stories. And when in the tafsirs of Quran, you'll see where they've used these kind of stories to bolster their argument and say, well, this is an understanding we have of this particular verse, and here is something that happened that we think may be of interest to you. And it's an Israeli report. So there's nothing wrong with that, as long as people know what it is. A lot of his works were Israeli stories, which is good that they've been collected as well. Now, in the second generation, we had Asim ibn Umar ibn Qatada. We're going to go through these again, but we're just going through it briefly at the moment. Abu Bakr ibn Hazm and Ibn Shahab al-Zuhri, as mentioned, they were the primary collectors of a vast amount of knowledge that sadly we don't have any of the original works for. A lot of the original works perished due to the space of time, the span of time, and a lot of them perished because of the attack on the Mongols. Most copies end up in famous libraries, and those libraries are owned by patrons such as the Barmakids, such as prestigious families, or such as princes and governors and kings themselves who had an interest in this and they wanted to collect this kind of information. So it ended up in their libraries, and obviously where else to have a lot of knowledge than in Bayt al-Hikmah or other libraries in Baghdad. And in 1258, when the Mongols invaded, they totally destroyed the city, and they threw all of the books into the river Tigris and Euphrates, and those books were written with black Indian ink. And they say that for years, the banks of the river, you could see the ink. Like you could see the blackness of the ink stuck onto the sides of the river, and immediately you're going to get the river's going to turn dark, because as all the books release their ink, that river's going to turn dark. And then for years afterwards, as that ink collects on the riverbanks, you're going to see signs that books had been thrown into the river here. That's how much knowledge was lost. But under every cloud, there is a silver lining. Under every tribulation, there is a sign. There is a barakah in there. There is a reason for that. And what happened? Yes, we lost this knowledge, but at the end of the day, those same barbarian Turco-Mongol hordes that came down from the north and northwest and invaded Muslim lands became Muslims and became a great fighting force for the Muslims. And ever after that, actually, every single Muslim principality or emirate or caliphate has been run by Turco-Mongols up till the dissolution of the Ottoman Caliphate in 1924. Then in the third generation, we had Musa ibn Uqba. He was the one. Now, there are certain famous stories that need more attention. The Seerah is not somebody that people give a lot of attention to when it comes to classification of reports. Yes, they've all been classified, but they haven't been scrutinized in the same way as Hadith have. So some of these scholars, but Hadith scholars as well, they gave far more importance to a Hadith as opposed to finding weak reports which they would use in their Seerah. And who really cares if Lady Khadija was 40 years old or 28, if Aisha was 9 or if Aisha was 18 or 15? People didn't really worry about this because they had more other things to worry about. Right? What are the fine points of Aqidah? What are the fine points of fiqh or usul? Those are things that are much more important. It doesn't matter if you're marrying a 9-year-old or a 15-year-old at that time, or a 18-year-old. It doesn't matter if Lady Khadija was 28. I postulated the theory she was 28. Many people had a problem with that. Musa ibn Uqba, that was the name I think one of you gave, he also has this, and he has his proofs for this. And this makes more sense for me to believe that she was 28 than she was 40. We're going to look at that, inshallah, when we get to that part of the Seerah. He was a story of As-Zuhri. His manuscript was lost, but recently parts. So a lot of these people's manuscripts that have been lost, parts have been discovered here and there in certain libraries. I'm not sure. I don't think it would be archaeological locations. We certainly have found stuff over the last 10, 15 years to do with the Arabic language in archaeological locations, but manuscripts have been left sometimes sitting for hundreds of years in obscure places in Muslim libraries around the world. Even in the West, lots of manuscripts ended up in the West, and there's a blessing for that as well. For everybody that says, why are certain manuscripts the only copies of them in the whole world in the hands of the Germans or the Brits or the French, and the Muslims do not have one copy of that original manuscript? That's not fair. Well, could Muslims actually look after these manuscripts? Are we in a position to look after these manuscripts? It's from Allah that Allah has safeguarded these in the hands of the non-Muslims. Moses was protected in the house of Fir'aun, right? So why can Allah not look after source material in the hands of the non-Muslims? If you go to Egypt and go into the museum, the most famous museum in Egypt, the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, have a look at its traditional Victorian colonial style setup. It's glass, and I even thought when I saw it that you can just smash the glass and take whatever out, and that's it, walk away with it. And they've got padlocks. They've got like glass desks kind of things that shut with padlocks. Anybody could break it, anybody could steal anything. And there's no temperature control, humidity control, light control. Contrast that with the British Museum, where they're showcasing the same things. They've got temperature control, they've got light control, they've got humidity control. And you can't steal those things very easily. So there is a blessing in all of this. It's just preservation of material. Muhammad ibn Isḥāq, the Prince of Seerah, he's known as, his book is lost. Part of it again was found. People don't know this, but this picture that I've posted is a part of the original Seerah of his, one or two extracts of his original work. It's been found. So this actually throws a spanner into the works of the Orientalists that turn around and say, oh my God, like you had nothing and now you've got this, and now they've got to explain it away. So we had the same thing with the Quran, where one of the oldest fragments of the Quran, the Birmingham manuscript, in all places in the world, in the heart of Victorian industrial England, you know, Birmingham, that's where it found refuge. Allah put it there. Muhammad ibn Sa'ad, he is the student of and the secretary of al-Wāqidī. Wāqidī is a problematic figure. We'll have a look at him. Sa'ad's work is a bit more stronger, and it encompasses far more than his teacher. He took work mainly from Wāqidī and Bukhari. And then we have Ma'amar ibn Rashid, another compiler of the earlier generations. We have Muhammad ibn Umar al-Wāqidī, which depends how you look at it. He can be problematic, but it depends how you interact with him. I don't know why the screen keeps doing this. Is there a message or something? Waiting room participants. Okay, right. Ayla needs to come in. Cool. Ibn Hishām, he took the work of Ibn Isḥāq and he got it from a direct student of Ibn Isḥāq, and he summarized it. He took bits out of it, and there's something very interesting which he said when he did something which we'll talk about later. So these are from the third generation. Now, if you're interested in this, there's a huge number of books that were written. Wikipedia has a good list. One can start. So if you look at biographies of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it'll give you a list of the earliest going all the way to the present time. Take your pick. You'll see Orientalist work, you'll see modern work, you'll see medieval work, and you'll see some of the earliest works as well. So this is for further reading. Now, the sources of Seerah, there are only three sources. The first source is the Quran, the second source is Hadith, and the third source is Akhbar. The interplay between all three of them is together. You cannot leave one out and take the other. The Quran is the biggest source of Seerah. Why? Because everything that's happening in the Quran is in direct reference to something that's happening in the life of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Hadith is a more detailed explanation of this, which we look at. And then Akhbar are wider versions of history that may not be as reliable, but they also have their place. So the Quran is a given. We both accept that. Now, then it leaves this. Nobody's going to sift through the Quran because we have it preserved, mutawatir, it's there. You have the other sources would be the Hadith and the Maghazi literature. Now, they need sifting through. And you can say that really, in essence, both of them in the early period were the same thing, right? And then they spread as more and more reports came that were of a weaker origin, and some of them had no referencing, but they did add meaning to certain scenarios in the Seerah. So the difference between Maghazi literature, and in the early period, it was called Maghazi literature, but really, for all intents and purposes, it's Seerah. But it's called Maghazi literature because a lot of the early work that was collected was to do with the wars. And it just took that name, and it sounds very dramatic and, you know, very adventurous and nice to call it that as well. So the Hadith are arranged according to doctrinal, judicial, and legal topics. For you madrasa students, you know this. Maghazi literature is arranged, so it's the same sources, remember, but they try to arrange it in a chronological and incident-based system. So do you remember last week I said that you have a hadith that's totally abstract. You have a Quranic ayah that can be totally abstract unless Allah's referencing something where you can understand straight away this is what's happening. Hadiths are normally in the abstract. They're just floating in space. You have the Maghazi writers trying to somehow give context to that hadith and say, well, this was the scenario surrounding the hadith. Fair enough, we've kind of worked that out, but now we need to place it somewhere. Because without placing it in the right place, we don't know how it was properly implemented, and we don't know how we can take lessons from this as well. So this is what the Shia and the Sunni differ on when it comes to certain reports. The placing of them make a big difference in the understanding of them. Also, we'll come across this also regarding the story of the I say conversion, because I believe this. Abu Talib was a Muslim in my eyes, and again we'll go through the evidences for that. When they quote you the hadith or the Quranic ayah, oh Prophet, it's not for you to pray for forgiveness. If you look at the chronology of this ayah, this was an ayah that was revealed in Medina, right? So it was a late ayah. So how can you apply this ayah in Mecca? So these are some of the arguments that people use to prove their point. So it was because of this I said I'm not going to go through anything with a fine brush, because we're not muhaddithin or mufassirin or anything like that. They know what they were doing and they have the right to do that. All we can do is regurgitate their information, and to be regurgitating the information in that depth, it's not it's above our pay grade in this particular course. It would have been nice. I mean, somebody can do it. I normally like stuff like that, but I don't want to bore anybody. And it meant each lecture would take a few weeks to make instead of a few days. So greater attention to authenticity is paid to hadith. They cannot afford to mess up when it comes to the chains of narration. That's why in Bukhari you'll find some stranger hadith. Bukhari wasn't interested in the actual wording as much as he was interested in the sanad, the isnad, the chain of the actual the hadith. It was the understanding, the aimma, the imams, the fiqh imams of the religion. They were more interested in the wording. Once they know a hadith is sound, they would look at the wording and try to understand how these rulings were implied. Now there is an argument I've come across that they say that the aimma, the fiqh aimma, the mutlaq of the religion, were not as proficient in hadith as the muhaddithin. But then there is another argument that you can say they had to have been. Why? Because they needed to understand the narrations for themselves to derive the rulings, because they didn't have the opportunity to go around asking Imam Bukhari, oh, give me everything you have. Imam Bukhari had the same sources available to him as other people do. This is another argument, but I'm sure you're understanding what I'm trying to say here. And many times when they make the accusation against Imam Abu Hanifa that it was more ilmul ra'i, it was more his own opinion, ra'i, as opposed to actual hadith. No, that's mistaken. And had that been the case, then for generations afterwards, each time a hadith proved a specific point, the madhab would have been changed, but it was never changed like that. So that gives you the understanding that Imam Abu Hanifa had some sources to him that we're not clear on today. And Imam Abu Hanifa, when he made his own opinions, they didn't come from thin air. They actually came from a sound basis of a hadith he had understood or heard from somewhere down the line. That it doesn't necessarily mean that he had to have proven it. And this is what you'll see now. There are certain hadith that we accept as mursal. We know this. The top level of that hadith is not even there. The Hanafis accept it. All of the four schools accept it. One of the strongest arguments for that would be when you laugh in salah. When you're laughing in your salah, according to the Hanafis, your wudu breaks and your prayer breaks. Now this is based on a mursal hadith, where the top level, the level between the Rasul ﷺ and the first person to have heard it, is no longer there. But there's an understanding in the earlier period that the early people didn't lie. They would never lie like this for no reason. So these things are accepted. And then the chains underneath each bolster each other. This is a very interesting science if somebody wants to study it. But all of these things give you an understanding of why the Imams would have known these things, the rules of hadith and collection, and then implemented their own subject. So likewise, when it came to Seerah, in the first instance, it was authentic hadith. So you'll find hundreds upon thousands of authentic hadith being used for Seerah. Then you'll find akhbar in the same great number, or probably even less, akhbar being used that have some basis. So when they're collecting reports that have a weak basis, don't forget there's no smoke without fire. So just because someone is not quoting his source, it doesn't mean that the source is weak. And there are ways that you can find out and say, well, this source is a bit weak. This doesn't make sense. How are we going to apply certain rules and say, well, we reject the story of Ibn Isḥāq or Wāqidī, or Tabari, we will totally reject this story. There are some principles, right? So we're going to look at those principles. So when an Orientalist comes to you and says to you, well, you know what, this is what Ibn Isḥāq says, the first thing you need to do is say, okay, show me the source material. You'll find they will quote something from Ibn Isḥāq where Ibn Isḥāq has given no source. Right. At that point, you can say, well, there's no source, so this is not even a hadith. This is not even a report to us. Where's his source? Right? You're telling us that we don't have sources in our own literature, and you're rubbishing our literature. So now you're regurgitating a story where there's no source. So you're a hypocrite. So that fails his argument. He's not going to have enough scientific or academic rigor or basis to go back and go through all the literature and pull out the usul and say to you, well, these are your own usul. That's for us. We then need to look at that hadith and say, or that report, sorry, and say, Ibn Isḥāq included this according to the criterion set by the ulama in the past. Can we accept this? Yes. Can we reject this? Yes. Or what does it really mean? So this is the sweetness of this specific science. So the rules of isnad are not always observed in the same way, even though it was the same scholars working on the literature. So the Quran first, we're just going to mention it in brief. One, because it's the primary source of the Seerah. Number two, for barakah. Number three, because we're going to pull one or two understandings out as well. It was revealed over 23 years. It wasn't revealed piecemeal. It was revealed many a time to do with an action or the thinking of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Right? So not only was it was number one, let's get the fact of its authenticity out the way. It was mass transmitted and memorized by many of the companions. So those who say that, oh, you don't have no real Quran, that's a very weak argument. It was something that's been mass transmitted. Look how much huffaz we have today. From all over the country, people do not even understand Arabic, and yet they memorize the Quran. So likewise, you can take that mesh back. That mesh goes back to the source, and it would be ludicrous for any Orientalist today to say, oh, well, you don't really have a Quran. So that's out the box straight away. The beauty of it being revealed over 23 years actually gives more credence to the Seerah. It was written down during the lifetime of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So for those who say it wasn't written down, it was written down, just like some hadith were written down. So we do have textual basis for it as well. And the chapters were given their final arrangement in the time of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, is in the way we have them today. And as I said, poetry and old traditions were legendary. If they could memorize huge lines of poetry, why could they not memorize Quran, which is easy to memorize? The Quran used to be written on bones, on palm fronds, on skin, and on stones. So here is a museum in Sharjah where you can see there is skin, parchment. That's not paper, that's vellum. That's what old writing, that's what old paper was like. It was, you bang out leather until you make it very, very thin, and you write on it. That's why it lasts 1,000 years, whereas paper doesn't last 1,000 years. So you can get beautiful manuscripts of vellum. So it's very nice to touch as well. Palm fronds. The Muslims were not the only people to write on palm fronds. You'll find beautifully written works by other religions on palm fronts. You know, the Arabs were very simple people, so when they wrote on palm fronts, it was very simple. A palm front is the branch of it's a branch of a palm tree, right? So the central stalk is quite thick and it's fibrous, and you can write on it. You can flatten it and write on it, and it lasts a long time. It's like woody. If you can do Google searches for beautiful artwork, beauty and like manuscripts in other religions where they've used palm fronds to write as well. So on the bottom right, that's a palm front. Next to that, above is a stone. Next to that is the shoulder blade of an animal. It's probably going to be a camel. The companions would write on that as well. This is the Quran written on a palm front. Right? Do I have a second picture of it? There we go. So you can make out that Surah Al-Fatiha on this side, but this is just probably done for decoration. But the real Quran would have been written, as you can see on the left-hand side, on a palm front. So it lasts a long time. This is Arabic writing on camel bones. This is the Quran written on the right. You can read it, the surah there, and on the left, I don't know what's written, but something is written there as well. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim is at the top. Rahman ar-Rahim, I don't know. Sorry, I've got allergies here because of the climate in Uzbekistan. So further reading is warranted. So there's a book by, it's a very famous book. Has anybody heard of this book, by the way? The History of the Quranic Texts.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Has anybody read it, by the way?
Yeah. Just
Right.
a few chapters.
Yeah. Try to internalize this book, because every generation has an attack. The attack today is the attack on the Quran. And not only is there an attack on the Quran, there's an attack on creed. When I was growing up, we never heard of any Muslim in England leaving Islam. Today, we hear stories of Muslims being born and bred in England. That's your generation, leaving Islam. And a lot of it is to do with creed, proving God. So we need to be on the right page of how to prove God to them. That means making adjustments when you teach them Aqidah, learning certain philosophical concepts that you need to now impart when you need to give somebody evidence. Maybe they're not interested in your creed. Maybe you just need to let the penny drop and say, well, you know what, the Kalam cosmological argument, give me a break of this argument and maybe then I'll become whatever you are. But I can't find anybody breaking this argument. So you think of it logically. If you can't find a break in it, then accept that there must be a creator. Now let's look at what creator it would be. Would it be Jesus? It breaks. Then you go into your creed, right? It breaks the rule of, all the specific rules that are to do with God alone. Would it be the Tao? Would it be Nirvana, the Buddhists? Would it be pagan gods? Would it be whatever it would be? Then you can do that. But first we need to get that person back into the religion. Also, a lot of these atheists that are now pandering themselves on YouTube as ex-Muslims, God knows if they are or not. I actually heard one, he could recite the Quran very well in a beautiful melody. He was half Hafid, or he was a full Hafid, and he was now a non-Muslim. Now, these guys, the arguments in this book, they give you arguments, the Orientalist arguments of the non-preservation of the Quran. So to know if you are alims now, and if you are Muslims, and you are we in the West are at we're the vanguard of the Muslim defense against the attack on it by Islam. The vanguard is always at the front. You have the rear guard and the vanguard. You're strategically placed by Allah where you're literally facing Rome, the Romans, right? You're facing them. And you're the first defense. And the vanguard is not just the defense. The vanguard is the one that does the attacking. So you have to be involved in da'wah. And the only way to be involved in da'wah is to know these arguments, because this is what they have in their defense. They say, oh, you don't have the complete preservation of the Quran. You don't have the preservation of Hadith. Your stories in your Seerah are not reliable. So if you don't know these arguments, you can from memory give him the creed of Imam Tahawi. Imam Laqani's poem, a jawhara, you can from memory, you can word off the Baykuniya. Does that make what is that going to prove? You could start doing your Arabic fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu, fa'alat, fa'alta. What's that going to do? You need to be able to know enough philosophy, enough logic, and enough about his attacks that you come back with a rebuttal. And this book is your first point of access. Zaytuna has a teacher called Professor Ali Atai of Iranian background. He did an excellent post on blogging theology. It's a 2.5-hour lecture where he rubbishes a lot of the arguments of the Orientalists. Now, the Orientalists are going to give you extremely sophisticated argumentation. If you don't know any of these defenses, you're going to fall back on your faith and say, well, I believe because I believe. But what I keep saying is in the West, that's no longer enough. You have to have an argument for yourself, and that argument you have to use against them. So watch this lecture, buy this book at the very least. So this is about the Quran, further reading for yourself. So the Quran, it contains references to specific events in the Prophet's life, both public and private. Can somebody give me any references that it contains regarding the Rasul's life? Because that's primary source material, right? Tell me.
When Aisha her chastity was being
Excellent.
questioned.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a primary source material. Anything else?
There's another one, Surah Duha.
Surah Duha or Surah Taha?
I said Duha, but I'm
Yes.
not sure about Taha.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Surah Duha, where Rasulullah, Allah's describing him of how he found him, what he did for him. This is primary source material. So we have his role as a preacher. Allah keeps telling us he was a preacher. He is sent as a warner and a conveyor of good tidings. It contains the replies of all the non-believers. Every single argument that the non-believers thought about in their hearts had the audacity to challenge Rasulullah on. Allah replied. This is key material, right? So if you want to know what really happened, the Quran is telling you. All we need to do now is look at the details and put it into its proper context. The persecution of the Muslims is being described. The orphanhood of Rasulullah. This is going back to pre-prophethood now. His poverty. We know he's poor. How do we know he's poor? The Quran says so. His relation with his wives. His relations with his wives, it's been mentioned in the Quran in many places. The calumny directed against Lady Aisha, anha, salamullah alayha, also. As you know, this you mentioned it yourself. Even the temporary inattention to a humble believer, the Surat Abasa, right? Where Rasulullah kind of showed he's a slight. See, you have to be careful with the wording here when we do the understanding of this. You know, like a slight, oh, why did you have to come now? Can't you see I'm talking to somebody? It's a slight change of face. Allah reprimanded him. Allah reprimanded Rasulullah 4 times in the Quran, right? Where he says, no, it would have been better for you, O Prophet, had you done this. So this is primary source material. So we always go to the Quran first. So when the orators say you have nothing, say, what about all these stories? So there's no aspect of the Prophet's lifetime mission which is not alluded to in the Quran except the mention of dates. So we have a huge amount of material in the Quran, but what we don't have is dates. Now that was the work of the Maghazi writers to work out the dates, not even the Hadith writers.
Ustad, I think someone's in the waiting room.
Let's have a look. That's it, everybody in, yeah? Right, so the Quran covers all the major events such as the battles, the treaties, the emotions, but without the small details. For that, we need Hadith, and then from Hadith, we need chronology, which is Siyar, right? So the Quran covers the main life. So remember I told you about the map last time? So you've got an empty map. We want to fill that map. So you have the Quran. Now, if you have that map in front of you, which is like space and time. So major things are happening. Each of the verses are coming down. Imagine those verses are being populated on your map in different places. But as of yet, there's no timeline. Then you need more details. Then you have the hadith. Okay, so this event happened. This is the detail. This event happened. This dot here. Let's zoom into the dot. Okay, Sulh Hudaybiyah. Okay, mentioned in the Quran. Allah's hand was above their hand. Okay, zoom in more. What are the details? Okay, these are the details. Zoom in more. When did this happen? Seerah. Do you understand? So they go hand in glove together like this. You cannot separate them. The hadith, which is the second science, are what? The sayings, the actions, and the tacit approval. No need to go into this. Everybody knows this. Right? Now, the hadith sometimes has a tremendous amount of information. The Quran, if the Quran mentions one line, some hadith are very lengthy. This makes their reports of prime historical importance. Often they are extremely vivid and detailed. Now, we don't read those hadith. We only read the small ones. You know, whoever makes up a lie against me, take his seat in the hellfire. This is one of the few hadith that is not only sahih, but it's in its actual wording, it's sahih. This is the 100% wording of Rasulullah. You can't say that for most of the hadith corpus, even if it's sahih. You know, and do this and then this, you get this reward, or stay away from this. Best of you is best to his women folk. These are small. These are 2 lines or 1 line sometimes, right? But then no one looks at the ones that are half a page, and they are there. For example, the vivid and painful account of Wahshi and his subsequent atonement. Rasulullah asked him, he said to him, you know, obviously it was very painful, but he just wanted to know, you want closure. So he said, you're Wahshi. And he said, how did you do it? You know, how did you do it? I just want closure. So Wahshi had to tell this painful story to Rasulullah, and he got his atonement when he killed the Musaylima ibn Kadhab a long time later, where now he could feel himself worthy of standing in front of Rasulullah again and saying, look, you know, had you been alive, O Rasulullah, this is what I did for you. The companions noted his utterance and actions. Many were written down. So again, the Orientalists would like to have you believe that nothing was written down. They were written down, that even Rasulullah had to sometimes stop them and say, hey, don't write them down as much, because he didn't want the Quran to be mixed up with the hadith, right? So one of the messenger asked them not to write down all his statements. I think there's a spelling mistake here. So for example, this hadith in Muslim, where he asked them not to write down that much hadith, and there was a reason for that, because he didn't want the mixing to happen. We know that Abban ibn Uthman ibn Affan collected and transmitted some reports relating to Maghazi, and also taught fiqh and adjudication based on hadith to people, including Abu Bakr ibn Hazm, and he was born 15 after Hijri. So he was born probably 2 years after Rasulullah's demise from this world. So, and at that time, we know he was collecting hadith. And where was he getting it from? He was getting it from his father. He was getting it from the senior companions. And it was all written down. And it was all taught. And if somebody says, why we don't have this source material? Because it's common sense. You're not going to have that source material, but those writings, we have proof that they're in other books, and that are in other books, that are in other books. And the Orientalists accept this, and they understand this. So during the same period, a junior contemporary, Urwa ibn az-Zubair, very famous companion, unrestricted access to Rasulullah's household. He gained fame as a muhaddith and a faqih. His relationship alone allowed him to gain numerous accounts concerning the early days of Islam. He could go unrestricted and ask the mother of believers directly and say, I want to know this. And who better than her to tell him about Rasulullah? You know, her eyewitness first-hand account given directly to her nephew. We say sina basina, heart to heart. And his reports came down through reports, came down through reports. They came down to us through his son Hisham and Ibn Shihab az-Zuhri. There was also the caliphs. The first systematic state initiative was taken when Umar ibn Abdul Aziz became caliph. This was a government. So you're going to get some small rich person. Maybe he says, you know what? You're such a bright student. I want you to collect a few hadith and teach me them. I'll pay you something. Probably that was happening. You're probably going to get a rich businessman. You're probably going to get even a family member. You're probably going to get a governor. But this was a state-taken initiative where the Khalifa, the Caliph, forced you, ordered you, said, hey, you come here. I want you to do this. Here's the money. Nothing is, I'm pulling all the stops out. You just get busy doing this. So this was when? This was very early on in the time of the Tabi'in, Tabi'in, right? Where he's beginning to do all of this work now in a systematic level, and it's been preserved somewhere, and it comes down to us in later books. So just a tiny example, because there's no point, we're not going to go into the science of hadith, but it's good to mention the early hadith corpus. We have the Muwatta of Imam Malik. Look at the date that was compiled, and to this day it's one of the most authentic collections, and it's a very famous collection, right? And it was compiled between sometime after 93. If he was born in 93, then obviously maybe he started collecting from age 10, age 15, we don't know. But let's say from 100 Hijri, he was collecting primary source material from senior companions that were still alive. I'm not sure if he directly met a companion, but he certainly met the Tabi'in and Tabi'in. Then we have the Musnad of Sulaiman ibn Dawood ibn al-Jarrad. Look at that date again, very early date. The Musnad of Abu ibn Abdullah ibn Abd al-Rahman al-Darami. Yeah, sorry, I always write Abd and Allah separate like this. Forgive me for my allergies. So these are very early dates. Forget Bukhari. Bukhari came later. Forget Muslim. Forget the famous books. These are also famous books. And the others had to rely on the same chains of narration that these guys relied on. And these guys' chains of narrations were less. And the less of a chain of narration you have, the smaller the chain of narration, the less chance of an error creeping in. Again, if somebody wants to do further research, I really, really suggest this book. Has anybody read this book? Anybody? No?
No.
Yeah, read this book. This book is an excellent introduction on the science of hadith, and it tells you how they collected, their motives for collecting, who commissioned it, what they consisted of, what their criteria were, how people went chain hunting, how the people sought the least number of chains, how prestigious they were, and how one collection would have a hadith weakened and another collection would have it strengthened. And it's an excellent read by a phenomenal scholar of the modern period, even though he's got one or two controversies, but which scholar doesn't have controversies? In the past, scholars had controversies too. The greats, people like Imam Abu Hanifa had a problem, Imam Bukhari had a massive problem with Imam Abu Hanifa, and it's mentioned. You know, Imam Malik had a problem with Wāqidī. People would call him a liar. They would call each other heavy words like liars and Dajjal, right? So if we look at scholars from the time and we rubbish their works because they've got one or two controversies, which scholar, which human being doesn't have a controversy? This is part of life. The only people free of this are the Anbiya. That's it, right? Even the companions had problems with each other. If you look at the hadith, they're swearing at each other. It's come down to us, right? Then the third source, which is what really concerns us now, is the Seerah Maghazi literature. Remember, I told you in the early period, Seerah and Maghazi was used kind of more or less to mean the same thing, but a lot of the early reports that they were interested in gathering normally were to do with the battles, because you can, you know, a lot of information is gathered. That information has no useful purpose in hadith. but it does have a useful purpose in Maghazi, and it's dramatic, it's interesting, and it's something that the hadith scholars would probably overlook for a hadith that would serve them more in their lives, whereas the Maghazi collectors or the same muhaddithin that were collecting for the subject of Maghazi would then pay attention to and say, right, let's collect this report. And they would put Sahih Hadith into the collection as well as akhbar, weaker reports and stories without any chains of narration. This started at the same time as the collecting of hadith in a very, very early period. The first scholar to have concerned himself with Seerah Maghazi was Abban ibn Uthman. Very early. He was someone that would ask his uncles, as you call the senior companions, you call them uncle, uncle, uncle. So he would sit and ask all of the great companions, tell me about this, tell me about this, tell me about this. And he would memorize it and he would write it down. He was Khalifa Abdul Malik's governor of Medina from 75 to 83. So Abdul Malik commissioned him to become the governor of Medina, which opens up more avenues for him to gain access to people and to collect reports. And this is obviously, back then the governors were based on their merit, religious merit, as opposed to their governance skills. So this also shows you that these people were of prime character rigor. Nothing but a few isolated reports of his original work survive. You can find it wasn't no point me putting down reference after reference after reference, because those references no one's going to read, but they're available. I'll give you the source material if somebody really wants it. But as you study these sciences, you'll come across these references yourself. Urwa ibn az-Zubair al-Awwam collected, transmitted a large number of reports and also gathered specific information about the prophetic life. Spelling mistakes, why? In reply to queries made by the caliphs Abdul Malik and al-Walid, he submitted a number of written statements. So now don't forget, his brother was lynched by, he probably studied it in the other Ustad's lesson, one of the students here. His brother was lynched by the Umayyads, and he supported his brother originally, but then he made peace with them, and they would ask him they would correspond. So they would ask him for stuff, and then he would give them what they were asking him by way of religious learning. We have Ibn Isḥāq, al-Wāqidī, Ibn Sa'ad, and al-Tabari. They all quote him. They all quote him. So his work, even though it's not available to us, it's in the work of the scholars from the very next generation, which proves to us that there was a work going back because they've directly mentioned him. In written communication, Urwa does not generally mention his sources, though while reporting a hadith, he usually refers to al-Mu'minin Aisha as his source. So the good thing about him is a huge number of his reports went back to Aisha. How lucky he was. Nobody could doubt that report. When it came from Aisha, that's it. You don't need to ask for anything else. It's direct from mouth to heart, and it's there. But in his communication, back then, a lot of people, even Imam Malik did this, they don't mention every single source. Because if you're living in a pious society that's so scared of lying about Rasulullah, they're not going to lie. So you're not going to write down every single name. You're going to say, yeah, I heard. But it was only later that people started forging and making up hadith for political purposes, even for religious purposes. You know the hadith of Rasulullah, whoever makes a lie about me, he make his own seat in hellfire. The word min is used, right? Is it the word min? I can't remember. Ilah, in the Arabic, maybe one of you could tell me, is used. They twisted it and they said, we're not lying against the Prophet, we're lying for the Prophet. Yeah, we're not lying. Do you understand what I'm trying to say here? You lot probably know this. So they make up all these. So for example, one particular pious person says, I see that nobody reads Quran today. So he goes, how can I get people to read Quran? Nobody's listening. Make up a hadith and give it to them. And if you question this guy, why did you cause mass confusion by making up a hadith that says that if you read Surah Fatiha 1,000 times in the middle of the night, you're going to get great riches drop on your head. This is just me making it up, right? But why did you make up something like this? And he would say, nobody was reading Quran. I made it up for them to read Quran. They would say, don't you know the hadith that you've now earned your place in the hellfire? He says, but who says I was lying about the Prophet? He goes, I was working for the mission of the Prophet. I was making up these stories, working for the mission of the Prophet and trying to bring back people in line with prophetic teachings. So this is justification for many of the hadith that came down like this as well. We have Shurabil ibn Sa'ad, 123 Hijri. He reported his hadith from Zayd ibn Thabit, who was a very famous personality, and Abu Huraira, very famous person, and Abu Sa'ad al-Khudri. These three people, no, we don't need to mention these Sahaba. This particular companion took directly from these companions, this particular companion of those took from the companions of Rasulullah, and he is said to have written in his Maghazi a list of the immigrants to Medina and of those who took part in Badr and Uhud. I think before this, nobody had written down a list as conclusive as this. He was the first person to have written down a list like this. So you can see now already in their mindset that at this very early stage, there's become a separation from hadith and Maghazi. So the hadith has still been written down. A lot of attention is being given to chains of narration, whereas when it comes to the Maghazi, they're a bit more lax, but they're starting to systematize it now. So now, okay, so we know there was a battle of Badr. These are the hadith. Fair enough. But we want to know the name of the companions. So they start to seek. And then when they get the name of the companions, then they start to systematize it. Okay, who was the first one there? Who was the last one there? Right, we've got a report of this companion being there. Bilal killed his former master. Okay, this Ali did this, and Hamza did this. Right, but then they try to systematize it and say, well, what could have happened first? Realistically, if Hamza is killing somebody here and it happened with 3 people and Ali was there, that in our tradition this means that this is how the Muslims fought their battles. So we would put that right at the top. Okay, then we have Bilal killing his master. What was Bilal saying before this? Bilal was saying, let me through, I'm gonna kill him. Either he lives or I live, or may dirt be on my face if he survives today. Okay, how could somebody scream like that in the middle of the battle? You're drawing attention to yourself, you're going to get killed. Okay, that must have happened at the end, right? So you see how they're trying to systematize it. But here are the problems now. He's regarded as an untrustworthy author. So Muslims know who they could trust and Muslims know who they couldn't trust. No Orientalist can come to us and say to us, well, you know what, these guys are not even trustworthy. Actually, sit down with us. We'll tell you who they are ourselves and we'll tell you what we take from them, what we don't, why we do, and why we don't. He's not cited by Ibn Isḥāq or Wāqidī. And for Wāqidī to not cite him is very interesting. Ibn Sa'ad reproduces his report on the prophetic journey from Quba to Medina. Ibn Sa'ad, who's a student of Wāqidī, decided to reproduce his journey for his own reasons, but Ibn Isḥāq and Wāqidī did not cite this guy. This is a whole other science of why not, which we're not going to get into, but it's just, for our purposes, is enough to know. Then we have Wahab ibn Munabbi from 34 Hijri to 110. He was of South Arabian of Persian origin. So his mother was Yemenite, his father was of Persian stock. He took a special interest in the Jewish and Christian traditions. Said to have compiled, all of them compiled their own books, by the way, but we don't have those books today. We have references of them in the greater books. Said to have compiled Kitab al-Mubtada and Kitab al-Maghazi. Ibn Isḥāq and Tabari, Mas'udi, Ibn Qutayba and others, they took from this guy. Nowhere has he mentioned the source of his information. So even though Tabari took from him, Qutayba took from him, Ibn Isḥāq took from him, nowhere did this guy mention any of his sources. So that's a whole nother can of worms there. The next generation, the Tabi'un and the Taba Tabi'un, 3 of the scholars from a list of them deserve special attention. There's Abdullah ibn Abu Bakr ibn Muhammad ibn Amr ibn Hazim, and Asim ibn Umar ibn Qatada, and Muhammad ibn Ubaidullah ibn Abdullah ibn Shahab al-Zuhri. We did mention quite a bit about him, but we're going to mention more about him. So this is the next generation now. Abdullah ibn Abu Bakr ibn Muhammad, his family background allowed him to collect considerable material. So you find that a lot of the people that ended up collecting a lot of information is because of their family connections. They were already of the aristocracy, the newly made aristocracy, and they had access to a lot of people, and they were put into motion very quickly for collecting this sort of information. A notable aspect was he attempted to establish a chronological order of the Prophet's campaigns, which Ibn Isḥāq adopts. So when you read Ibn Isḥāq, you'll see the chronology here that was taken from this person. Also transmits the Prophet's communications to various princes and deals with the Arab tribes' delegations to the Prophet. This specific, so within Seerah, you have many branches. So you have the letters, the authenticity of the letters. You have the communication with the princes. You have the delegations. You have the peace treaties. You have the wars. All of these are various bits of information that fit in the Seerah. Not every one person was a specialist of this. People would specialize in different areas. And then the famous compilers like At-Tabari, very, very famous compiler, Ibn Isḥāq, al-Wāqidī, they would take this specific information from these companions who specialize in this work. But however, saying that, how accurate was their work? He also does not mention his authorities to many reports. At times, he also incorporates his own views in the reports he transmits. So he's transmitting something where he's not given the reference material to, and maybe now he's also added his own commentary to something where he's given no source material to. That again doesn't mean that it didn't exist. It basically means that there was probably some smoke to the fire, but he didn't give you the fire. The only time we reject the smoke is if it breaks certain principles, which we'll see towards the end of the lecture, inshallah. Ibn Isḥāq, al-Wāqidī, Ibn Sa'ad, and Tabari all cite him as their authority and quote him frequently. Asim, the second person, belonged to a noble Medinan family. His grandfather, Qatada, was a close companion of the Rasul. He was renowned for his knowledge of the Seerah and Maghazi. Khalifa Umar ibn Abdul Aziz assigned him a chair at the mosque in Damascus to narrate to people the Prophet's campaigns and deeds of companions. So if he was given this honor, that means he knew a lot, right? So you now have, in the most famous mosque outside of Mecca, Medina, in Damascus, you're given a chair to narrate these stories. So you must have had a lot of stories and a lot of details. One of the chief authorities of Ibn Isḥāq and Wāqidī for Maghazi proper. So if we're looking at just Maghazi now, he was one of their chief sources. Like Abdullah ibn Abu Bakr, he frequently does not mention his authorities and also mingles his opinions with the reports he transmits. Then we have Muhammad ibn Muslim ibn Ubaidullah al-Zuhri. Zuhri needs no introduction, very, very famous personality. Belonged to the Banu Zuhra of Mecca. You can then join his relationship with Rasulullah and all the other tribes. Received his knowledge amongst others from Urwa ibn az-Zubair, ultimately became the most learned of the Medinan society of his time. So he was one of the most learned people. He received a lot of his knowledge directly from Urwa, and he received his knowledge directly from his aunt Aisha radhiyallahu anha. So you can see how now he's well respected, well learned, and a trusted source of knowledge. Ultimately, because I'm reading this, I read this before, but one thing I wanted to say is he is the one whose report we get about Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam committing suicide. Have you heard that story before? Has anybody heard that story before, that Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam grew so upset that revelation stopped that he wanted to end it all and throw himself off a mountain?
Yes. Yes.
Right. Now, I rubbish that story completely. I don't care if Shihab al-Zuhri said it. Now, there's a reason for that. When we come to that, the penny will drop. Like I said to you, some of my lectures are boring, and they're boring for a good reason. And then When the penny drops, everything fits into place and you think, oh, thank Allah that we learned all of this in the beginning. This boring stuff, I don't know why Ustad is teaching us this. It's taking over an hour and we're still on source material. Why? What purpose does it serve in the seerah? Brothers and sisters, grand students, trust me, this will fit when the time comes. I reject that story. And who am I rejecting? According to what we know so far, I'm rejecting the story by Shihab al-Zuhri, which is written in Bukhari. Horror of horrors, students. What kind of teacher have you got? He's rejecting Shihab al-Zuhri, who took from Urwa, who took from Aisha. And nobody knew Rasulullah better than Aisha. So how can I reject this guy? Well, I'm not rejecting this. As I'm telling you, it's all about doing quality research. I'm not rejecting Bukhari, I'm not rejecting Zuhri, but I reject that story. And inshallah, we'll get there. So I'm glad I'm boring you with my stories. But when you get to the other side, you're going to think, thank God that we learned all of this as well. That story is wrong on many accounts. And the biggest problem I have is if any one scholar mentions that story in his book, I put that book away. This is one reason why I cannot pick up the book, The Sealed Nectar. This is one reason why, actually, I'm not going to give you other books that's written in. I'll give them in due time, inshallah. I'll give them in due time, inshallah. Some people I give the credit of doubt to, but other people I don't. I don't excuse other people. As a Muslim, we should have a problem with this story. That your aqidah cannot be complete if you believe that your Rasul was weak enough to throw himself off a mountain. That's not the isma, that's not the remarkable attributes of a prophet, of a vice regent, of an ambassador. And the highest form all of this is a Rasul of Allah Azza wa Jal. You know, he was sending someone so weak of mind that was going to throw himself off a mountain. Subhanallah. Ultimately, he became the most learned of Medinan society, equally well versed in hadith, genealogy, and maghazi. Obviously, his pedigree was exceptional. He had a remarkable memory. He wrote down reports and passed them on to succeeding generations, collected and recorded a large number of hadith, received a commission from the Caliph Umar ibn Abdul Aziz to make a compilation of it. Among his works, we find a maghazi, but it survives only in the forms of quotations in the works of others. So most of his work has been lost. It's only in other books that we find it. It appears from the quotations in Ibn Sa'ad that Az-Zuhri dealt with maghazi proper and also other events of the prophetic life. You can research this in much more detail. This becomes academic, becomes scholarly now. So this is beyond the spoke of this particular lesson. But if anybody wants to, you can write PhD papers on this kind of work. Az-Zuhri generally gives isnad with his reports, but sometimes they are lacking. Again, he lacks. Now that is a clue, but he gave an isnad when he gave a sahih hadith when he mentioned that story. But something is so obvious sometimes that when scholars miss it, you think, where is your scholarship? And then you have a problem. You have to prove that Aisha is 9 at all costs. You have to prove Aisha Khadija is 40 at all costs. But when it comes to Rasulullah committing suicide, you accept it blindly. Oh, because it's in Bukhari. In Urdu, we say, Qurban Jawa. May we be sacrificed for you, O scholars. During his long and distinguished academic life, Az-Zuhri became a teacher to a large number of pupils. One of these three became of prominence. Musa ibn Uqba, which one of you mentioned, Ma'amr ibn Rashid, and Muhammad ibn Isḥāq. So this is the first entry of Isḥāq. So you can see now it's actually quite late. There was a lot of work done before him, but just because the work hasn't survived, Muhammad ibn Isḥāq has the luxury of him and At-Tabari and Wāqidī are probably the only three that have the luxury that we have their work surviving. 99% we have it surviving. That's the only reason why it's famous. Otherwise, for sure, imagine the material that was in Zuhri's work or in other people's work. Musa ibn Uqba acquired knowledge at the Prophet's mosque, principally under the tutelage of Az-Zuhri. He is reckoned as a trustworthy and reliable authority. He compiled a book on Maghazi which has come down in fragments and quotations. From these extracts, it's clear that his main authority was Zuhri. So if somebody says, well, you only have fragments of his information, if an Orientalist attacks you like this, you can say, yes, we only have fragments, but when you compare those fragments with the fragments we have from Az-Zuhri in other books, you see that it matches up. So it's clear that he's quoting verbatim from Az-Zuhri, which gives credence now to Az-Zuhri, that he's obviously quoting verbatim from somebody else, which gives credence to the whole science. So when an Orientalist talks rubbish like this, these are some of the answers you're supposed to formulate. Al-Wāqidī, Ibn Sa'ad and At-Tabari reproduce reports from him on a number of various different topics. Ma'amar ibn Rashid was born in Basra but settled in Yemen, well known as a muhaddith, and also they all compiled Kitab al-Maghazi. Like his predecessor, works of it only survive in quotations and extracts in subsequent works like those of al-Wāqidī, Ibn Sa'ad, Tabari, and Baladhuri. Baladhuri is someone you've probably heard for the first time now. It was a later historian. The prime reports of Ma'amar do not survive, only fragments of them survive in those four particular scholars. Most of his statements go back to Az-Zuhri also, which means that he was faithful to his science. So if he gives you a report that comes down in another book that you have to then question and say, well, we don't know the authenticity of this. If he's correctly reporting from Az-Zuhri, that gives half credence that that report is going to be a sound report, because he's not going to then pull a report and change it or seek a. The only thing you can say regarding that is maybe his source material wasn't sound. But if he's reproducing soundly, isn't he going to make sure the authenticity of his source material? If he's getting weak material, he would not put it in his book, or he would mention it. If he hasn't mentioned his source material, there is credence. Now, this is how our sciences work. The Orientalists work in the exact opposite way. That's the reason why we cannot reconcile. We work on a different basis. They work on a reductionist, negative, pessimistic worldview. We work on a positive, theological, theocentric worldview, where we put a person's character in the forefront, knowing that he wouldn't lie. And if he was to give a weak report, he would mention something about it, either no reference or that it's a lie. And we'll mention where other scholars have picked apart other people's arguments based on this. Isn't this what Hadith science is from beginning to end? He paid a lot of attention to biblical history and to the life of Rasulullah before migration, which is a golden source now. He is one of the main sources of al-Wāqidī. Muhammad ibn Isḥāq ibn Yasir, the prince of Seerah work, the most well-known student of Az-Zuhri, if only through his work Kitab al-Maghazi. So he would not have been known as one of the most famous students of Az-Zuhri had it not been for his Seerah of Rasulullah, which has come down to us today. It has come down to us more or less complete through an addition by Ibn Hishām. So the one that we have came down to us through Ibn Hishām, not directly, but through a intermediate student of his, a direct student. Ibn Ishaq's grandfather Yasir was a Christian Arab. His father was a zealous collector of hadith. Ibn Ishaq received his knowledge from Az-Zuhri, Asim and Abdullah ibn Abu Bakr. Also, he supplemented it by other accounts obtained in Egypt and Iraq. He wrote his work for the Khalifa Abu Ja'far al-Mansur. Now, by this time, the Abbasids were in power. It was no longer the Umayyads, but this was not an official commission. So for people, the reason it's written here, it was not an official commission. It needs to be highlighted because if you're writing for a caliph, and especially when it came to the Umayyads and the Abbasids, there was a lot of political misuse of hadith. There was a lot of hadith that were forged. Each side was forging hadith for its own side, and a lot of history was being changed to suit their own purposes. The Abbasids came to power off the back of their claim that we will institute one of the Ahlul Bayt to power, and we will do away with the racist, dreaded, self-serving Umayyads. They kept half their promise. They did away with the Umayyads. They brought the family of Rasulullah to power, but it was the wrong branch. The Muslim world at that time, especially in Iraq and Iran, wanted the direct descendants of Rasulullah, the Ahlul Bayt proper. They were from the Banu Abbasiyah. They were the sons of Abbas. So when the same Muslims that helped them, they said, whoa, whoa, this isn't our agreement. He said, well, you wanted the Ahlul Bayt and we are the Ahlul Bayt, because they come into four sections. You know, the name of the Ahlul Bayt can be applied to four groupings. So the problem is that once you're commissioned by an official, this is where you find a lot of the Sunni Shia stuff coming up as well now. Certain, like for example, Muslims have a problem with, Sunnis have a problem with a bit of a tangent, but it's very relevant for historians, and especially as we're talking about source material. So you need to know this. For source material, you need to know this. Don't just trust any source material, right? When you have a source material in front of you, you need to ask yourself what the political climate was, who was it commissioned by, what was the overriding bias of the time. These are questions you need to ask. You cannot just take something like, for example, Bukhari chose hadith and collected hadith from a even vaster pool of Sahih hadith. He kept it to a specific minimum, and part of his collection was to bolster the Shafi'i madhab. He has some words to say against Imam Abu Hanifa, right? So there was not just one motive for his collection, right? Sunnis have this knee-jerk reaction when you mention the Ahlul Bayt, and all of it started from this time. Today, I mention the Ahlul Bayt, and a Sunni will say to me, oh, are you Shia? Why do you mention this? And it really, really annoys me, because if they have love for the Ahlul Bayt, we are Sunnis and we have a greater claim. When Rasulullah fasted Ashura, what did he say? He said they were doing it on one day anyway. Rasulullah said that we have a greater claim over the Jews and their love for Musa alayhi salam. We are Muslims, we have a greater claim. We shall fast for 2 days to differentiate ourselves from the Jews. If I live for next year, I shall fast for 2 days. That's why we do it for 2 days. So we have a greater claim over the Ahlul Bayt. But yet most of us don't know anything about the Ahlul Bayt, don't know the rights they have over us, the great reverence that was held all over the world for them, and in large parts of the world for them, even to this day. Historical accounts would furnish you with many a beautiful account of how the Ahlul Bayt were treated in the Arabian Peninsula, before the state of Saudi Arabia, and during the state of Saudi Arabia, in Central Asia, in Hind, in Europe. Oh, we can go on a tangent and talk about this so much, but I'm not going to. The thing is when Ibn Isḥāq wrote his Seerah, he was given a commission by the Khalifa Abu Ja'far al-Mansur. Now, he wasn't the best of characters. Well, I'm not going to say anything. I'll leave it to you. This is not a history class. When a Khalifa commissions something, there's always a reason behind it. And now you've got to be careful what you write. Imam Bukhari could not freely write all of the hadith to do with the Ahlul Bayt in his book. Had he done so, he would have been finished. This is a very important lesson to learn, by the way. What did Bhuti, Sheikh Ramadan al-Bhuti, rahimullah, who was martyred in giving a lecture he had been giving for 40 plus years in a mosque in Damascus. He was killed in the mosque as he was giving a lecture. What was one of the most... What did he say? He says, if we speak out against them, there'd be one less scholar in the world. And who will be there to teach you? Right? So, if you speak against a leader and nothing's going to happen apart from the fact that he's going to kill you, what purpose did that serve? So, Ramadan al-Bhuti actively supported the regime because you're supposed to not rebel. Rebelling only causes more destruction. And he also said to people that the reason we don't condemn is because you want to see our blood, you want to see us dead on the street like you've seen yourselves. Who will teach you the religion? So there is hikmah in this. Imam Bukhari also had to be careful. Many of the people of the past had to be careful. Ibn Ishaq also had to be careful, and he had to, we'll see what he had to do. And the reason it's being mentioned that it's not an official commission, because if I turn around and say it was an official commission, straight away, as historians, you should get suspicions to say, well, if the Khalifa asked him to write it, of course he's going to write beautiful stories about the Khalifa, beautiful stories about the Abbasids, beautiful stories about the pagan times. He's going to leave out the bad stuff about our families. This is exactly what happened with the Umayyads also, by the way. You get fake hadith in favor of them, right? You get the truth being hidden deep in books. To this day, the Sunnis don't pull it out because they know that they will have to then defend a position that's not defendable, and it doesn't serve the purpose of anybody as well today. Sometimes you've got to mention these things, but for the most part, we don't need this. Why is it that the Shia are always against us? Because they have access to this material. Just like the Orientalists, they go out of their way to find this information to harm us. The Shia do the same thing. Muslims sometimes are astonished at some of the claims the Shia come out with, or the Orientalists come out with. But they are written in the books. You've never seen them. You'd never be taught where to find them as well. But they are there. But they serve no purpose. You stick to the main narrative, you're on safe ground. If you really, really need to go into it, then be ready to have an answer. You're not historians. You won't be taught this side of history. When you're taught your Dars Nizami, you're taught certain things, but you're not taught the historical critical method. Had you been taught it, then you could self-criticize. That's why it's mentioned here. We'll mention the part, what happened, right? It was not official, which means that the Khalifa said, yeah, well done, yeah, keep going, but it wasn't official, which means that he wasn't a puppet of the regime. Sheikh Albani was given there's two types of ijazas. One is an ijaza of competency, one is an ijaza of honoring you. So just like you get an honorary degree. So Muhammad Ali, the boxer, didn't study in a university, but they gave him an honorary degree, right? So many boxers, there was the other boxer, what's his name again? They get honorary degrees, right? That's just a way of honoring them for their work. Albani holds a ijaza from a famous personality, by the way, right? And if a Salafi shows you that, you're going to be like, oh, how did this happen, right? But the truth of the matter is he was told that there is a specific personality who has a love of books and hadith, and he spends most of his time in the library in Damascus, and all he does is he studies. And he's a very, very acute student. And his name is Sheikh Al-Albani, whatever his name is. So the Sheikh met him and says, well done, my lad, well done. And he gave him the ijaza. But that's just an ijaza of encouragement. It doesn't mean it's a real ijaza that now you have obtained something from me whereby you can say I'm competent and I can teach. No, it's not that kind of ijaza. So this wasn't that kind of ijaza. This was just a well done, my lad, carry on going. Thank God for that. Otherwise, what else would have been taken out? Now, this edition of the edition of Ibn Hishām, which is best known as Sirat al-Nabawiyya, was based on a copy of the work which he received from Ibn Ishaq, his immediate student, al-Bukhari. Due to the well done milad, due to that, he had to take out something very important from his seerah. So this is why we need to always analyze history, hadith, any science from a critical level. That's why you find some scholars accepting a hadith and not accepting a hadith. The hadith, Ana Madinatul Ilm wa Ali Babuha, right? Some people don't accept it. Some people accept it. Again, you have to look at the political context. The ones who are refusing, why are they refusing? In whose time were they working? The ones who are accepting, why are they accepting? In whose time were they working? Right? So it's not an easy case of this hadith is weak, we're going to reject it. Many of hadith that didn't make it into Bukhari are just as sound, that talk about the fada'il of the Ahlul Bayt that most of the world doesn't know about. The tragedies of the past are being played out today, and we're suckers. We're suckers that we're all sucked into this big thing. You're either a Rafidi or you're a Nasibi. I am proud to say I'm neither a Rafidi, neither am I a Nasibi. But I am a proud lover of the Ahlul Bayt, and people have called me Shia, and my answer is the same answer of Imam Shafi'i. He says, if my love for the Ahlul Bayt means that I'm a Shia, let it be known that I'm the biggest Shia. Right? I had big problems in the past teaching about the Ahlul Bayt, where I had a lot of resentment, knee-jerk resentment from diehard students of mine, where they couldn't bear to listen to this kind of stuff. Right? But then you need to check what's inside here. Islam is the middle way. And if you're gonna take me as an ustad, you're gonna have to accept the middle way in everything. You know, your love for the Ahlul Bayt, the historical critical method, and checking up sources and opinions in fiqh and everything. Everything has to be the middle way, because Rasulullah walked the middle way. So now this is what, well done Milad. This was the effect of that now. He didn't make any changes according to what we know in his text, apart from one notable omission made. Now look at the wording he's used now. One notable omission made for fear of some people. Who are those people, you think? Ibn Isḥāq had to change something in his Seerah, or Ibn Hishām had to change something in his Seerah. Ibn Hishām changed some things. He made some things more easy, presentable. Certain long poetry was, categorized properly, probably taken out, given, because Ibn Ishaq's work is not an easy work to read, by the way. It's actually quite difficult work to read. And it was Ibn Hishām, all he did is he made it more presentable. But one omission was out of fear. And what was the fear? The fear of some people. So who those some people were, I want you to tell me once we read the report. The report was of the presence of Abbas in the Battle of Badr on the Meccan side and his capture as a prisoner of war. So there's your biggest clue. He was in fear of some people. Who were those some people now? Can somebody tell me?
In the Abbasid government?
Of course. He was scared of the Abbasids. Now, had he kept this report in, off with your head, you would not have had his Seerah today. Or you would have had half of it redacted. Or you would have had charges against him that he was, God knows, a weak person in this and that or this. Or his name would not have been in history. Right? How did it serve the purpose of the Abbasids to have him remove this line in his book of Seerah? Tell me, how did it serve the purpose of the Abbasids? Somebody tell me.
Ustad,
Yep.
Maghrib time just came in London, so would I be able to just come back in 10 minutes?
Yep, I can put the class on hold. Does everybody want to put the class on hold, or should I carry on? We can have a break, yeah, because we've been going for almost 2 hours. We've been 1.5 hours. We're done now, because after Ibn Ishaq it's just al-Wāqidī, and then so pray. We take a break for 10 minutes. Is that fine by everybody?
Yeah,
Yep, Jazakallah khairan.
Yeah. All right, cool. So then we'll see each other back here in 10 minutes. I'll just keep the camera on and I'll edit it out once I do. For everybody else, I ended up uploading the first part onto Teachable website. I need to add the payment link for everybody. You've all paid, obviously, but for next month, inshallah. But I saw that Teachable is actually quite expensive, so I'm going to spend all day tomorrow researching a cheaper, what do you call it, online teaching platform. And inshallah, by tomorrow, I'll choose one and I'll put both lectures up. I'll edit this part out of the lecture and I'll put it up. And, inshallah, there's going to be more work as well. There's going to be the fiqh of menstruation, which most of you know, but it needs to be taught in detail. There's going to be a few other things, OCD related and everything. So it will be populated. So you'll enjoy, inshallah. And this is a long thing. When you make a good cup of coffee, right at the end, what do? You have to throw in a dash of cold milk or water to settle the grinds and settle the coffee down. It's bubbling, right? So all of this, what we're doing now is we're settling the grounds. Lest tomorrow we're reading Seerah and something comes up and I've refused to accept a report by somebody and the whole class jumps on me and says to me, but teacher, the evidence is 100% clear. Why are you refusing to accept this report? This great scholar said it, this great scholar said it, this great scholar said it. You're choosing a minority opinion. Why? Right? Or somebody says to you, oh, your Seerah Ibn Ishaq has bad stories in it, which there are a few. Your al-Wāqidī, he has huge problems. And in your Seerah, you've got no evidence for this particular story. You know the basis that Ibn Ishaq is not the end of the word for us. Tabari isn't the end. They were getting it from sources that were top-notch before them. And just because they didn't give us their sources, it didn't really make a difference because they were from the pristine generation. And we know from the pristine generation which story is true or not based on how that story plays out. So that's why you take the hot with the cold, you take the bitter with the sweet, the salt with the sugar. Some lessons are going to be boring. That's just my style. But then some lessons are going to be, you're going to come back to, like, it's going to hit you, boom, and then you're going to think, damn. So I hope I don't bore anybody. Let's see who's in the class. Let's play about with this. I'm not familiar with this software, by the way. Aila's in the class, Maisha, Mariam, Saida. So, who's this? Ustad with the lesson today on the source of Seerah. I just wanted to mention, as I'm not sure if you are aware that in London, Maghrib Salah. Okay, cool. Najat. So, I take it everybody's from England apart from one person. Who's not from England here? All the England people have gone to pray. Maisha.
Oh, I'm from England, but I got married and moved to the Netherlands.
All right. Okay. MashaAllah, you're in the Netherlands now. So your prayer times are different over there.
Yeah, we already had ours 20 minutes ago,
Okay,
or
cool.
half an hour.
Cool. It's lessons a bit boring today, but don't worry, next lessons, you need to set the grounds and they do get better.
No, it's quite a lot at once, I'm not going to lie, but it's really interesting to know
The
this
thing
stuff
is
too.
that when people teach Seerah, they don't go through this source material, right? They just tell you, yeah, we have
No.
Ibn Ishaq and we're going to rely on Martin Lings, and Martin Lings, he relied on Ibn Ishaq. If you look at Martin Lings, most of his Seerah follows the Seerah of Ibn Ishaq, and then we're going to rely on Yasir Qadhi's book, and Yasir Qadhi's book, most of it relies on Ibn Ishaq, and we're going to rely, yeah, fair enough, there's nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't stop at Ibn Ishaq. You need to know the development of Siyar. You need to know how what happened in the early period. It's like we tend to stop at Bukhari. Bukhari said, but Bukhari came 200 years later. What happened in the interim period? The collections of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, the collections of Anas ibn Malik, not Anas ibn Malik, Imam Malik. What happened to all of that? For example, we had the collectors of Aqidah, when Aqidah was formulated into a systematic creed, that was 200 years later. So are you telling me that nothing happened before? We need to know what happened 100 or 150 years earlier. What was who were the earliest formulators of creed? Actually, it goes back to the Khawarij. If anybody formulated any sort of a creed, it was the Khawarij, who are out of Islam, where they pulled out a ruling and said, well, this is one of our tenets, and if you go against the Quran, you are a liar. If you go against the Quran, you are kafir. So the blood of Ali, the blood of Muawiyah, the blood of Amr ibn al-As, I think, is all halal upon us. And they managed to kill Sayyidina Ali, they managed to kill the governor of Egypt, but Muawiyah got away. Muawiyah got away. Right? So people stop at a certain point. We stop at the main events. When it comes to creed, we have a fully developed creed. And Imam Tahawi's creed from 1200 years ago. Fiqh al-Akbar, but that's an even older creed, but it's not, we don't know the authenticity of it now. So most people will be like, we'll stop there. But then you've got 200 years you still need to answer for. And that's where the Orientalist is going to get you. When it comes to Hadith, we stop at Imam Muslim, Imam Bukhari. But no, you've got 200 years to answer for. When it comes to Seerah, we stop at Ibn Ishaq. No, you've got 150 years to answer for. When it comes to Quran, the oldest manuscript we have now is from, like, they say now 70 years moving onwards. We still have 70 years to answer for, but we don't really care about that because we believe the Quran is mass transmitted mutawatir. So that's why I just want to get the groundwork out of the way so no one can ever challenge you. Even if you don't remember this, you know now that Urwa was involved, Az-Zuhri was involved, very, very big people were involved. Qatada was, his son was involved. And then they passed it on to Ibn Ishaq and everything. And then we're going to look at the weaknesses in some of the stories in good time as well. So had this been a YouTube lecture, it wouldn't have gone into this detail, but it's because it's a private class setting. So my YouTube lectures on Seerah are in a slightly different format than these ones, by the way. So while she's praying, I'm going to step away and I haven't prayed my Isha as well, so I'm going to just try seeing how much of Isha I can do before the UK people come back. The camera's going to stay on because I don't want to fiddle about with this. I don't know how to use this. Are you back?
I'm back.
So everybody's back, yeah?
I'm not sure about the rest.
Who's that? Is that Mariam, yeah?
Yes, Mariam, but I'm not sure about Saida and Najat.
Okay, let's just wait another minute, another few minutes. Some lessons carry on long, some lessons are going to be short, but
Ustad, I had a question.
yeah, you can ask.
With Ibn Ishaq and Ibn Hishām, I just got confused towards the ending with the explanation about the emissions. It's just the names got confused in my head. So if you could please explain that again when you get the chance.
Cool. So
Ustad, I think. Oh,
yeah.
Sorry. I think I interrupted a question before when I spoke. I'm sorry about that.
You didn't, don't worry. You know something?
Okay, sure.
I hastily did this, so my editing is really bad on this, and I don't like it when I do this. Every page has an error on it. Apologies for this. Next time it's going to be more better than this. So I'll answer that question now then. I'll answer that question now. So Ibn Hishām, Ibn Ishaq wrote his Seerah, and his Seerah, as far as we know, it contains everything that he took from his sources and from previous companions and tabi'een, tabi'een that we mentioned. And they weren't normal people, they were great people. So if you're taking sources from a nobody, which he did, like small people, which he did do, yeah, fair enough. But when you're taking sources from greats, then there's credence there, even though those sources are not going to be mentioned all the time. But we know enough to know that Ibn Ishaq took from great people. And sometimes if you don't mention sources, you have to give them the benefit of the doubt. But there are a handful of stories in the Seerah corpus, especially of his, that you have to challenge. We're going to challenge them when we see them. Regarding redactions, Ibn Hishām did take out things. Now, there are different understandings of what he took out. Some say that he just reorganized the work because the work is quite complex, because traditionally when people write, they write for themselves. So even though it's a book, it reads like a storybook, it doesn't really read like a storybook. It's not something that you could read from beginning to end and enjoy. So Seerah is always taught from a beginning to end, and it's taught in a way where there should be no jarring points. At the moment, there's a lot of jarring points in what I'm teaching you, because I'm not storytelling. But once I start storytelling, you're going to just sit back and relax, because it's all going to be passive listening, and all of it's going inside you. At the moment, it's jarring. So his Seerah is a story with a chronology, but it's not told as a story. And it's kind of does get quite jarring if you read it properly. So Ibn Hishām just reorganized that. He took superfluous, probably I've heard, superfluous poems he took out of there. Or he may have ordered them, or he may have changed the layout of a few things. But he reports that one omission that he did do was he took out the mention of Abbas as being a prisoner. Why? Because at that time, the Abbasids were in power. Now, I don't know whether it was Ibn Isḥāq that was told to take it out or Ibn Hishām that was told to take it out. I'm under the impression that it was Ibn Isḥāq that was told to remove it, and it was removed. So by the time it came down to Ibn Hishām, that line was no longer there. But even though that's not there, other people did write it because we have other sources to verify that that story was there. So even though the Abbasids could get this by force of power removed from a Seerah written in their time, there were other chains where Seerah were coming through that ended up in books later, like At-Tabari, where these things weren't removed. So it doesn't really make a difference. The truth still comes down to us. But we just need to know and be critical of this and to understand this. So my question was, why was this line removed from the Seerah? What purpose could it serve the Abbasids to have this bit of information removed from the Seerah, which stated that Abbas was not a prisoner in the Battle of Badr? What could it serve? Anybody have an idea?
Does it aid them in their legitimacy to rule?
Yeah.
As in,
Carry on.
As in, if they're like they're saying that they're from a noble family, but if this is in the records that Abbas did fight against the Prophet ﷺ once upon a time, it's a bit of a stain on the record.
Of course. If you're trying to gain legitimacy, you should have no stains. Back then, and as it is now, legitimacy is on how perfect you're made to look. So you could lose a political campaign, like we've got Trump and Bush. That Trump and whoever the guy is, Biden. Just that little shooting incident that happened, and the way that Trump reacted, could be what tips the scale for him now, because he stood up brave and and he fist pumped the air. Another person may have just cowered and just run out of there, but it made Trump, you feel like he's someone that can handle the pressure of the whole country, man. He can do something for us because he's brave and he's this and he's that. So for the Banu Abbasiyya, who their whole claim was, we are Ahlul Bayt and we are righteous people and we've taken over from the bad Umayyads, and the Umayyads would do the same sort of stuff as well, by the way. And look at the Umayyad lineage, look what Yazid had been saying, look at what this person had been saying, and we are perfect. So if someone says, but hang on a minute, you're claiming to be perfect from day dot, but your own uncle whose name you are ruling under was your own, not uncle, your own forefather, your own third or fourth generation forefather, in whose name you are ruling under, he was fighting against the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So to hell with you being righteous, we don't want you anymore. And then, these are like rallying points for civil strife. This is exactly what happened when they accused Umar, Uthman, when the group of people wanted to come and plot against Sayyidina Uthman, may Allah be pleased with him, Caliph, the third Caliph. What was one of the excuses they used? They said, is it true that he wasn't present at Badr? Yes, that's true. Is it true that he wasn't present in the persecution period in Mecca? Yes, that's true. Is it true? Is it true? Is it true? And each time somebody said, yes, that's true, they would say, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, right? And those were the excuses they used as a pretext to kill him. It took one of the companions at that time and to say, hey, you foolish people, hold your horses. Yes, he wasn't present in Badr, but do you know why he wasn't present? Because Rasulullah's daughter was sick, dying on her deathbed, and he ordered Uthman to take care of his daughter. And yes, he wasn't present in Mecca at the time of the persecution because he was married to Rasulullah's daughter, and they were sent away in Yemen, in Abyssinia by Rasulullah. Right? So there's answers for everything, but people who want to make rallying points, they make rallying points. So they use this as evidence when they wanted to kill him. And one of the killers was Abu Bakr as-Siddiq's son, right? Yani two best friends, the strongest connection on planet Earth, and they connected through marriage, blood, bond, prophethood, everything. And then the son ends up killing your dad's best friend. Yani it's really... So that's why politicians have to be very, very careful from this kind of information leaking out. Certain people don't want anything of their family history leaked out. What did the British royal family do in the First World War? They changed their name from their German name to the House of Windsor, which sounds like a very British name. But their surnames are actually German surnames. But because the Germany was considered the enemy, right? And our royal family is German. How does that work out? So they changed their name. So that's how these things play out. Right. So this Tabari has preserved the true account. That's why we know this story. And much of what was left out was preserved in the works of Tabari and Al-Azraqi and others. Right. So though his work is acceptable, the value of his work is somewhat compromised by the fact that some of his notable contemporaries like Malik ibn Anas and Hisham ibn Urwa question his credibility. So I have a list of every single person that said something about him, right? But we're not going to go through that list because, like I said, those lists, the opinions of the people who are calling him a liar or calling him unreliable, they're their opinions. There may be other scholars that turn around and say something else. So I'm not of that caliber. And I'm not gonna, be here. Let me just correct the spelling. I'm not gonna quote them, but you can find for yourself. You can easily find out what scholar and what his contemporaries had to say about him. Like I said, the only time that we're concerned with something is where a story seems very strange, and then you find out it's got no chain, and then you can say, well, it's got no chain, it's a strange story, we don't believe it. Ibn Isḥāq acknowledges that he received information from the Jews, Christians, and Persians and incorporated their traditions and accounts in his work. Often he expresses his doubt about the information he gives by interjecting the expression as they think, which is actually good. Sometimes people use it as source material. For example, what day is the birthday of Rasulullah? Does anybody know? Can somebody tell me what date we have for the birth date of Rasulullah? The ma'ruf, mashhur opinion. What date is it? Can somebody tell me? No? Say no so that I know you've heard me at least.
Is it the 12th of Rabi al-Awwal?
That's it. Rabi al-Awwal, the 12th, is worldwide considered the date of his birthday. In Uzbekistan, every single day in the mosque, they've got programs. In Pakistan, everywhere, in Tunisia, in Algeria, in Indonesia, Malaysia, in Syria, oh, these are grand affairs. And it's for the whole month. And the main day that everybody recognizes is the 12th. This is actually considered the weakest opinion. And this opinion comes directly from Ibn Isḥāq, and Ibn Isḥāq doesn't give any evidence for it. We have dates like the 12th, the 8th, and other dates where there's more stronger evidence for this. But because Ibn Isḥāq's Seerah has become the most famous Seerah, he's given a date of the 12th. And even though there's no evidence for this date, people have just taken it and said, yeah, we'll go with that. Okay, it's not a problem. It's not something, like based on your creed. Whatever day the birth date was, it was. But here's a classic example of this. So we just need to be wary of these things, and we will know these things. Yep, go on.
Sorry, Ustad. I heard that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was born on a Monday. Is that also
That's an authentic report.
okay? Okay, alhamdulillah.
Yeah. So what some people have done, and I have the source material for it, and I tried to incorporate it into my own seerah, but I don't think I can do because it needs much more research, is you can go back, you can go back in our calendar and work out exactly what day he was born, because we know it was a Monday. Now, our Islamic calendar is 10 days or 9 days, 9 days, 10 days, 9 days, 10, like it's either 30 days or 31 days. No, 29 days or 30 days, 29 days or 30 days. That means every year you're going to be behind the Gregorian calendar by 9 or 10 days. And it's self-correcting. So it's 1 month it's going to be 10, then 9, then 10, then 9, like this. And by the end of the year, it's gonna balance itself out. So all you need to do is go back in history, keep that date in mind, the Monday, not the date, sorry, the day Monday. And we know that there was a eclipse because Rasulullah's son died, Ibrahim, and there was an eclipse. And the companions thought, oh, this is a sign, this is a sign. And the Rasulullah came out and he said, this is no sign. We don't believe in no signs like this. This is just a natural event. It just coincided with the death of my son. So we can work out accurately to the day, to the minute when that eclipse started. So then you have like a time frame. Okay, so the eclipse was around about here. Let's go back and check on the dates now. Monday, Rabi al-Awwal, because our calendar cycles. So your Monday, if you're going to go back towards the time of Rasulullah's life, which would have been 55 years or something, 60 years before that, it's called what's the word for it in astronomy? It's like lag. So you fix the lag, you correct it, and then you can get the exact date of Rasulullah's birthday off by 1 or 2 days or something. So people have worked on this. They've done stuff like this. But still, even if people find out the exact day, they will always do Mawlid on the same day. Why? Because it's just become an institution where that's the day that's recognized as the birthday. And it doesn't really matter because nothing really changes. I know Yemeni ulama that do Mawlids every week of their life. More power to them. Abu Mashhar Najih ibn Abdurrahman as-Sindi, he wrote a Kitab al-Maghazi, but it has come down to us only in fragments quoted chiefly by Wāqidī and Ibn Sa'ad. Early Muslim scholars had a very unfavorable opinion about Abu Mashhar. So every time I'm telling you that an early Muslim scholar had an unfavorable opinion, there are a few that I've mentioned now. Remember this. Why? Because when you come across an argument in the Seerah that doesn't make sense, or an Orientalist picks it up, just check the source material. Is it coming from any of these guys? If it's coming from any of these guys, say, well, you know what? We don't even know. We don't even trust these guys ourselves. Yahya ibn Sa'ad al-Umawi compiled a Kitab al-Maghazi, but again survives in only quotations. Abdullah ibn Wahhab wrote one also. Abdul Razak ibn Hammam was a famous authority and contemporary of the above two, and Ibn Isḥāq. His Kitab al-Maghazi is reproduced in his Musannad. The above shows us that by this time it had become a well-grounded tradition. So by the time of Ibn Isḥāq, it wasn't just Ibn Isḥāq, there was a whole host of people now, right, who were writing siyar, maghazis, compiling the letters, the battles, and all sorts of events. The other sciences were taking off as well. Remember I mentioned Dalā'il al-Nubuwwah and Khasa'is al-Nubuwwah. All of those, everything was happening at the same time, but we're only concerned here with the Maghazi. So why don't we hear of these names? Because people don't, only fragments are left, or they're not reliable. Now, Wāqidī, and then there's Ibn Sa'ad, and then we're going to finish off. Muhammad ibn Umar al-Wāqidī, we need to know about him because a lot of the Seerah material comes down through him as well. The works that have survived from the early scholars in their complete form, right? So his work has survived in its complete form. So it's very important that you know who this character is. He flourished during the caliphate, during the time of Harun al-Rashid and al-Ma'mun. So this is firmly in the heyday of the Banu Abbasids. He received special favors from the famous and celebrated minister Yahya ibn Khalid al-Barmaki. Are you familiar with the Barmakids? Anybody? Anybody familiar? No? Nobody's familiar with this name? Barmaki? Say a no, somebody.
No.
Okay, you'll study the Barmaki family when you study the history of the Abbasids. They were instrumental in helping in the early 4 or 5, the early couple of centuries. They were the closest family to the Abbasids, and they were instrumental in civilizing the Abbasids. And they were an Afghani family. They were a priestly caste. The Barmaka, how it's pronounced in Persian, they were of the priestly class. And it was their learning and their splendor and their regalness that really illuminated the Abbasid court and the Abbasids in general. They fell out of favor. They were ruthlessly eliminated as a family, and they ceased to exist in history. And you should never try to get ahead of your masters, right? So if you read the book, The 48 Rules of Power, he mentions many as such a story. Tamerlane also had, there's a story about him as well. So the story goes is that Harun al-Rashid, or I think it was Harun al-Rashid, and I think, you know what? In the 1001 Arabian Nights, Harun al-Rashid is mentioned along with one of his ministers. I'm not sure if it was a Barmaki, but the Barmaki were great patrons of the arts, of museums, of learning, of libraries, of mosques, of charitable works, of endowments, and they outshone the caliph. So what happens when you outshine the caliph? The caliph's going to get rid of you. So never the rule is never outshine your boss. So he received favors from the Barmaki family. Al-Wāqidī was a versatile writer and compiled a large number of works. Of them, only his Kitab al-Maghazi has come down to us. He mentions the authorities on whom he bases his account, including Zuhri, Ma'mar, Abu Ma'shar, and occasionally Musa ibn Uqba, but not Ibn Isḥāq at all. So for some strange reason, he's not mentioned Ibn Isḥāq at all. I believe one of the reasons of that is because if you're mentioning people that are above Ibn Isḥāq, then people are going to automatically say, well, your material is going to be the same, your sources are the same. Maybe there was some competition, we don't know, but I don't think it was. I think it was that reason. It cannot be doubted that he did use the work of Ibn Hishām, right? So, you can't deny that he did use Ibn Isḥāq's work, even if he didn't mention his source. One other reason why he would not mention his source is if you're using something that's so blindingly obvious, you're not going to mention it. You want to mention stuff that people would say, oh, you used him as well. Of course, you're going to use Ibn Isḥāq. He was right in front of you. His work is the greatest work of Seerah, sitting right in front of you. The most complete work that was there at the time and the greatest of its time. Al-Wāqidī mentions that he received reports from others. He mentioned them by name. He concentrates his attention on the Medinan period. So he has a large work on the Medinan period. Muslim scholarly opinion of him is very unfavorable. So the least that can be said about Wāqidī, by the way, because you're going to hear a lot of people denounce his work. A lot of people, Muslims and non-Muslims. The least that can be said is he was weak in hadith collecting, but he was a master in Seerah. That's the least that can be said about him. If you want to find out the other contradictions and the strong words used against him, you can Google that and you'll find what they said about him. But that's another can of worms that I don't want to get involved in. He is unanimously repudiated as an unsound and untrustworthy authority on hadith, or having tampered with them for his purpose. They even accused him of tampering with hadith and changing them to suit his purpose. How true that is takes a PhD study. His secretary Ibn Sa'ad considers him a good authority on Seerah and Maghazi. Ibn Sa'ad produced a work that was much more greater than him, an excellent work. So if Ibn Sa'ad says something, then you have to think, well, if he says it, it might be true. But then again, who is Ibn Sa'ad? Ibn Sa'ad was the secretary of this guy. So of course he's going to boost his paymaster, right? So you got to take that with a pinch of salt as well. Muhammad ibn Sa'ad, you've probably heard of him as well. He's very, very famous for collecting the works of the companions. The largest work of the companions' reports come down through this guy. And he's one of the four. So the main four that when you study Seerah, you hear about again and again. You hear Tabari, you hear Ibn Hisham's rendition of Ibn Isḥāq, you hear Wāqidī, and you hear Ibn Sa'ad. These are the four main Seerah stories, Siyar, that you're going to hear about, because they are there in their complete form. But it doesn't mean that they were the greatest or that they did the most amount of work. Even though a secretary and writer for al-Wāqidī, he produced an independent and more valuable work called Tabaqat al-Kubra. The first two volumes of this encyclopedic work are devoted to the life and activities of the Prophet ﷺ, while the rest is a biographical dictionary of the companions and the generations following them. Based on al-Wāqidī's work, Ibn Sa'ad provides greater details, furnishes fuller isnads, and produces more complete reports. You have to then ask the question here. This is a thought question, right? This is what an Orientalist would say. This is what Patricia Crone says. She says, one person in the first generation provides you with a name. In the second generation, they'll provide you with what that person did. In the third generation, you'll have the date and who witnessed it. So with each successive generation, your information gets larger. This is the way the Orientalists look at it. This isn't necessarily the way we look at it. But I've asked you that thought question now, which you can just check up further for yourself. If Wāqidī is his teacher, and Wāqidī has encompassed a wide variety of sources, how did Ibn Sa'ad surpass his master and get an even fuller chains? Now, it's certainly possible. It's how you look at it, glass half full or glass half empty. This is research for you lot to do if you lot want to take it into that angle. But this is all we need to know at the moment. He pays special attention to the personal characteristics of Rasulullah, producing a number of original documents and arranging his materials more systematically. So for chronology and for systematic use, it's inviolable, and you'll see his sources everywhere in the Seerah, in every Seerah book. His tabaqat proper on the life of the companions and the tabi'un is very valuable, as it provides rare information about the various aspects of the Seerah. Because when you provide biographies of companions and what they did, it sits even tighter into the Seerah, right? Because sometimes it's the hadith are narrated through companions, and you need to fit that in perfectly. It's like a, how would we say it? Epistolary type of work without being epistolary. Scholars' opinions are in favor of Ibn Sa'ad, and he is generally regarded as a sound and trustworthy narrator. Then we have some later ones, just giving you the names. Abi Dunya Abdullah ibn Muhammad ibn Sufyan is another name he's not named by. His book has not reached us intact. Muhammad ibn Jarir at-Tabari, the most famous mufassir of the Quran, and his tarikh is absolutely amazing, right? It can be classed as on the same level as the Muqaddimah in its level of scholarship and what's gone into it. However, Tabari, because he's a great compiler, there are things that you will find in his books that are questionable. And if you read the first page of his book, he actually even says it there. Because again, the West use him against us. The Orientalists use him against us. They say, well, it's in your primary material, which is true. But Imam Tabari himself says in his Tarikh, he says, I am just a collector. You can read literally, you can download the first page of his book and read the first page of his book, right? It's translated into English. He says, I'm just a collector. He goes, my job isn't to sift out what's right and what's wrong. Other people can do that. I'm just collecting the reports as they come to me. His Tariq al-Rasul wa al-Maluk, Tariq al-Umam wal al-Maluk is an encyclopedic work of which the second and third volumes contain an account of the life and activities of Rasulullah. Much of it is based on Ibn Ishaq's work. With Tabari, the early classical phase of writing Seerah Maghazi can be said to have come to an end, right? So, however, work still continued. People branched out into the other sciences, because now we had a lot of material from Hadith being collected as well. But this was the early classical phase of Seerah writing, which came to an end at this time. So it came quite late, because Tabari was 320 after Hijri, right? So work was being done for 300 years. Final thing before we conclude. So what are the principles of Seerah reporting? Why is it that people are saying, oh, this is weak, that's strong, should we take this, we can't take that, we're not going to accept this? I made a huge statement against Bukhari. Why did I make that statement? So these are the 4 principles we need to know. Where any authentic hadith is available on a point of fact or interpretation, it should be given preference to any other report if it is not in conformity with the former. Where 2 or more authentic reports of the same fact or point give divergence, so you now have 2 hadith that are just as sound, but they're giving divergent accounts or views, the one that the Quran lends itself to support it. So the one that's closest to the support available in the Quran is the one you should follow. The other reports of less authenticity and in the works of and then other reports, right? So then you look at other material that can corroborate your one hypothesis, even if it's weak. The same rule should apply if such divergence is found in two or more equally weak reports on the same point of fact. That's why you see in the fiqh of Imam Malik, he uses, not Imam Malik, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, weak reports are used because they have a basis. And when the Salafiyah say, Ya, atini dalil, this is weak, right? We don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. What does it mean if this is weak? Yani you're going from a grade A Bukhari sound, Hasan Hadith, which is like a A minus. You're going down to Hasan Sahih, which is like a B plus, and then Hasan, which is like a B. And then when you get down and down, you're looking at a D, right? A D isn't a fail. A D is you still passed. It's not an F. It's not Maudu. It's not F. Right? So when people say weak, we don't follow this form of ibadah because this form of ibadah has a weak hadith attached to it. Go and eat your kabsa. Number 4, where neither the Quran nor any authentic hadith provides information on any point of fact, reliance has of course to be made on the reports or accounts found in the Seerah literature, though these might not meet the requirements of authenticity. So these are the 4 overriding principles, and they're common sense. We know this, everybody knows this, they're common sense, so we don't want to explain any details on any of them. Ibn Isḥāq, Ibn Hishām, Seerah still remains the best work, and no work has been surpassed or superseded, as they each rely on each other for information and use the same hadith. The sameness of the material suggests that perhaps we have not lost anything important, as what we have of fragments in other works is nothing new. So we haven't come across new information without sources, and the sameness of information shows us that most probably everything we have today is more or less as it should be. Nothing has been lost in time, and nothing more can be added, and they were all truthful in their claims. So this is by criticizing it, analyzing it, this is what we come to. Next week, by the way, so this is today's lesson at an end. Next week's lesson, we're going to review some Seerah books and pick out mistakes in them. I've put these 4 books because each of these 4 books has source criticism attached to it. So these are very famous books. The Seal Nectar, everybody knows this book. Muhammad, the Story of Revelation, everybody touts this book as being the best book on Seerah out there at the moment. The Life of Muhammad by Muhammad Hussein Haikal is a good Seerah book despite its flaws. And Muhammad by Martin Ning is the one that I told you not to read. Personally, for me, no book surpasses this if you want to develop a hal, a spiritual state, because he doesn't do what Sheikh Nadawi does, which is he provides you with background information. He doesn't do what other Muhammad Haikal does, which also provides you with background information. He doesn't do what Revelation, which is quotes from other places. The Seerah Nectar also too many interruptions with Quranic ayahs. This guy flows. He is Muhammad. Martin Lings is on a journey. He is footstep by footstep on his own Seerah journey, right? And that's what you want. And that's how hal is developed. Your state is developed like this. But that book also has problems, and we're going to have a look next week. I'm just going to give you some criticisms of these works so that you can then know what you're looking for. And whenever you read a Seerah book after this, you know the signs and what to do and what not to do. Thank you so much for attending today's lecture. I know it was boring, but you know, like when you go to university and sometimes you just got to get the boring out the way, man. You have to get the boring out the way. It just sets the scale. And you know yourself that as weeks go by, the lectures get much more interesting. Thank you very much, Jazakallah khair, for attending. Do we have any last questions before we conclude?
I have a question, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
You know the satanic verses, where I think Salman Rushdie mentions that it was in one of the earlier books of Seerah. So is it in one of the books that was mentioned, or which book was it? Or
Yep, it is. If my memory serves me right, Ibn Isḥāq doesn't mention it, but Tabari does mention it, or the other way around, right? But because this has clearly been mentioned in our sources, because our ulama were not shy of putting in everything that they had. right? That's why you get some very unsavory stories in the Seerah corpus and even in the Hadith corpus. One of the Hadiths in Bukhari. Now Bukhari is Sahih. Remember this, right? It's Sahih. There is a Hadith in Bukhari that's gonna twang your mind, literally gonna twang your mind, and you're gonna say, "What?" It's a Hadith about the creation of the universe. The creation of the universe. The whole universe is sitting between the horns of a bull, and the horn is sitting on a whale, and the whale is being held up by an angel, and the feet of the angel are touching nothing. This is the cosmic reality by that hadith. You know, like every religion has, like, for example, the Indian religion, you know, you have like the elephant, and then you have the tortoise, and on the tortoise, and then the world is on this. And then in the Greek religion, you have Zeus, and Zeus is holding the weight of all creation on his shoulders. And then in the, you know, like the Chinese religion, the universe isn't round, it's square, heaven above, earth below, and it's square, right? And every religion has its own cosmology. Are we to believe that our universe is sitting between the horns of a bull, and the bull is sitting on a hood, and the hood is sitting on being held up by an angel, and the feet of the angel are touching nothing? Yani, subhanallah, since when did our religion become fairy tales? But that's a Sahih Hadith in Bukhari, right? Now remember what I told you. Our ulama collected. Imam Bukhari was not interested in the sayings of what he's recording. He's interested in the chain. So he's recorded it. He's done his job. That's a Sahih narration. What context? How? The why? Can it be mawdu, which is highly probable? He doesn't know, and neither is he interested. This is the job of the other scholars from other sciences to come and pick from there and say, well, this is what we understand from this, right? So if somebody turns around and says, I don't believe that, of course we don't believe that. But yes, we believe it's a Sahih Hadith, but we don't believe the content of that Hadith, and you don't become kafir for denying the content of that Hadith, by the way, right? So likewise, Tabari said, I'm recording everything that comes to me. I'm just recording, and I only have time to do so much in my life. Let others come and sift through my information and give you the correct understanding. So Ibn Isḥāq done the same thing, Tabari done the same thing. One of them left it out because he thought how ludicrous, but one of them kept it in, and it's a misunderstood story. And this was the story picked up by Salman Rushdie, and he postulated it and used it in his book, and that's why he called it the satanic verses. There's no such thing as a satanic verses, and inshallah when we get there we look at it. I recommend everybody not to start looking at these kind of obscure information, because you'll spoil it when it comes to learning it from me, and you probably won't get the detailed picture of it as well. Martin Lings hasn't mentioned it, Muhammad Haikal hasn't mentioned it, and just read Martin Lings and follow, you know, for the most part, his book is 99% correct. So follow his book. And if he's not mentioned it, that's because nobody will mention everything in a book. What's not suited for people, it's a fake story. What's the purpose of mentioning it? When I wanted to originally teach Seerah on YouTube, I thought to myself, should I mention this story or not? Most of the Muslim Ummah will never have heard it. No Seerah book mentions it. What's the point mentioning it? Then I thought, you know what? If they ever come across it tomorrow by an Orientalist, they're in big trouble, right? So it's better to teach it. So now I decided not to leave anything out. All the stuff that you have never heard in Seerah, we're going to bring out those stories. We're going to give answers, inshallah. So we're going to prepare you so that tomorrow you go into this world and you know what you're doing. Somebody said to me, he says, somebody contacted me from that Seerah group, and he said, that after you posted some evidences of certain stories that are not strong in Seerah, or maybe there's no basis for, he goes, it blew my mind. He says, and I know people, it would probably shake their iman. I said, don't take it that far, Habibi. Why would it shake your iman? The Seerah is Seerah, right? It was never meant to be 100% authentic anyway, which we've just proven, right? It was never ever meant to be 100% authentic. It's a story told with mostly true stories, and the rest is embellishments, right? So don't take Seerah as your Aqidah. And if you're saying that people will leave Islam based on, because they've been told their whole life that Umar became a Muslim in a certain way, yet we don't know how sound that story is, or they've been told their whole life something, and then all of a sudden they find out that Rasul maybe heard a story, maybe Shaitan added a few verses and Rasul got confused, and now we don't know how much to believe him or not. Habibi, wake up, learn your religion, learn sound Aqidah, and learn the science of Seerah to understand that these stories don't shake anybody's Iman. And there's answers for these, and take a proper course in Seerah, and all of these will be answered. This is why I said that we don't have answers today. So there's no point shying away from these stories. This is a time where people need to know these stories, because if you don't teach them, a non-Muslim is going to come and teach you, and then you're going to be in big trouble. Any more questions? No questions? All right, okay, cool. Jazakumullah khair, Jazakallah khair, everybody, for putting up with me. 2 hours is a long time, but it's all worth it. You've got access to the inshallah, by tomorrow, this will be up as well. And you can go through it slowly again, and it's all ibadah, and it's all doing justice to Seerah. And we thank Allah for giving us the opportunity to be with the Habib. And we ask Allah that just as Allah has love for His Habib, we have love for His Habib. And just as the Habib had wants, and Allah will fulfill the wants, we love His beloved and we have wants, and we ask Allah to fulfill our wants just as He fulfills the wants and needs of His beloved. And our Lord is too generous to leave somebody out. Right? When there is collective dua being made, and there's one person who's sitting just outside the door, he just managed to crawl in. At the end, he missed everything. The whole barakah gone. He didn't pick up nothing. But he got there in the last Ameen. Allah is more generous than the most generous king who would say, you know what, that guy at the door, feed him as well. Allah is more generous. So we use as intercession our study of the Seerah always. And we ask Allah to aid us and give us an easy life and an easy reckoning and a pass, an A+ pass with the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in the hereafter. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
سيدنا محمد وعلى آله عدد كمال الله وكما يليق بكماله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على أسعد ما محمد وعلى آله عدد كمال الله وكما يليق بكماله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نور الهدى محمد وعلى آله عدد كمال الله وكما يليق بكماله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.